Chapter 1526. Everyone looked at each other and fell into deep thought. Qiguan Rang asked, "Apart from that, did the Nye army make any other moves?" Jiang Pingji said, "I just received intelligence from the scouts at the front line that the Nye army is indeed slowly withdrawing. The defense is extremely tight. If the scouts weren't capable and the horses weren't fast, I'm afraid they wouldn't have made it back. We sent out 5 teams of scouts today, but only 4 returned. As a mobile unit to investigate the enemy's situation and counter reconnaissance, the importance of the scouts was undeniable. The scouts under Jiang Pingji's tent were special forces who had undergone special training. Many reconnaissance and counter-reconnaissance techniques were taught by Jiang Pingji in a booklet. Scouting the terrain, drinking water, and even drawing topographical maps were not a problem. Their mastery of combat belonged to the group of people at the peak of the military camp. To facilitate the scouts' work, Jiang Pingji equipped them with horses of the northern borderline. The harness was also specially made. Not only were they fast, but they also had strong endurance and explosive power. They had an advantage in mobility. They could escape immediately if they encountered a large group of enemies and save their lives. Under such circumstances, the scouts suffered such heavy casualties. It could only mean one thing. The enemy was secretly making a big move. Qiguan Rang asked again, "Is there any news from Zhongzhou?" Jiang Pingji rested her chin on her hand and said, "The 2 places are far apart. By the time the news arrives, the Nye army would have withdrawn long ago." Once again, she could not help but complain about the backward means of communication in this world. At the same time, she missed the technology that allowed people to communicate across galaxies in her previous life. Indeed, technology changed life and the form of war. If she was given a mecha now, she could ascend to the throne in a short while. Under the circumstances of insufficient information, they could only use limited clues to determine the true situation of the enemy. Sun Wen frowned and said, "Nye Liang was quite capable. He could suppress a few uncles in the Nye family when he was alive. However, his death was too sudden. He didn't have time to give instructions." A group of old officials hastily pushed Nye Liang's son, Nye Qing, to the throne. "Nye Qing is gentle and kind. I'm afraid he won't be able to suppress the demons and monsters of the Nye family. Nye Qing only has a few thousand troops with him. If there's a mutiny in the Nye family..." What Sun Wen said was exactly what Wei Si and Qiguan Rang were thinking. Nye Liang died suddenly. There was no time to pave the way for his son, Nye Qing, to pave the way for his son. If there was a mutiny in the Nye family to seize power and Nye Qing was in danger, it would not be difficult to explain Wei Si's anxiousness and retreat secretly. However, was that really the case? Jiang Pingji knitted her brows tightly, as if she was going through a difficult decision. The salted fishes also learned to think. After thinking about it, they still chose to cheer for Wei Si and the rest. Xingyuan Miao Miao, salted fish doesn't need to use his brain to watch the live stream. He just needs to learn how to cheer for the military counselor. Shui Yuexiang, from the current clues, it seems that there is something wrong with the Nye family. The streamer can't just let the tiger return to the mountain and let Wei Dan and the others retreat, right? If they left, then so be it. If they turned around and went back to pacify the situation in the country, then the host's battle would have been in vain. Adhering to the principle of, take your life while you're down, the streamer should send troops to chase after the Nye clan's army so that they can't take care of both the front and the back. More than 200,000 troops were held back by Jiang Pingji. Nye Qing died in the Nye family's internal strife without any support. This plot was simply wonderful. I'm not a bar spirit. No, I don't think it's that simple. What if this was a trap to lure the tiger away from the mountain? The host had sent troops out of the pass to chase after the enemy, but the enemy had taken a detour to attack Zhanjiang Pass. If so, wouldn't the streamer be in a passive position? I'm not a bar spirit. However, according to the current clues, it's obvious that the Nye clan is in internal strife and Nye Qing is in danger. Is the streamer going to miss this opportunity and watch the enemy swagger away? Letting the tiger return to the mountain will cause endless trouble in the future. Nye Liang led more than 200,000 troops to fight the war. Jiang Pingji led troops to guard the pass. How much manpower, material, and financial resources did she expend? If the enemy left just like that, they would come back every few days for a stroll. Wouldn't the streamer's finances collapse? Jiang Pingji closed her eyes and didn't look at the bullet screen. She was deep in thought. After a while, she heard hurried footsteps coming from outside the tent. Report, the enemy has sent a letter of challenge. They've asked us to fight in 3 days. The messenger handed the letter of challenge that Wei Dan had personally written to Wei Ci, who then passed it to Jiang Pingji. She opened the tactical manual and took a look. Her right eyebrow was raised and there seemed to be a flash of light in her eyes. Regardless of whether it was the emperor in the previous life or the lord in this life, this expression meant one thing: she was angry. You're really petty. You wrote a letter of challenge and you don't forget to curse. Are you trying to bully me because I'm illiterate? Jiang Pingji muttered and resisted the urge to crumple the letter of challenge into a ball. Did I kill Wei Zishuan's wife or dig up his family's ancestral grave? At most, she angered Wei Dan's lord to death and abducted his younger brother. It wasn't a big grudge. Was there a need to curse so fiercely? Wei Ci knew what was written in the letter of challenge. His elder brother usually looked gentle, elegant, dignified, and polite, but he was quite vicious in his cursing. He remembered that in the previous life, he had written an elegy in front of Niel Yang's morning hall. The first half of the elegy praised Niel Yang to the heavens. In the second half, he mocked and insulted the villain who poisoned him. He cursed the person who poisoned him from head to toe, from his parents to his deceased ancestors. Wei Ci didn't know who poisoned him, but he later heard that Niel Yang's 2 uncles had fainted in front of the morning hall. Qiguan Rang took a look at the contents of the letter of challenge. There weren't many real words of challenge. The rest were sarcastic and sarcastic greetings. Of course, the words of a scholar wouldn't be so vulgar, not to mention that this was a letter of challenge. But it was infuriating enough. Qiguan Rang said calmly, "He's just someone who likes to flaunt his eloquence. My lord, you don't have to be angry with him." Jiang Pingji said, "How am I such a petty person?" No matter how harsh a scholar's cursing was, it was just that. When Jiang Pingji had just started streaming, the insults from the haters in the streaming room were spectacular. She could even ignore the vulgar insults that carried the organs of her parents and ancestors, not to mention those of Wei Dan's level. In comparison, she was more concerned about Wei Dan's purpose of challenging her. The scout had just sent the news back and Wei Dan had written a letter of challenge. No one would believe that he didn't have any ulterior motives. Everyone was obviously thinking the same thing as Jiang Pingji. Was Wei Dan's letter of challenge an invitation or was he trying to cover it up? Jiang Pingji tapped her fingers on the brand new bronze table. She frowned slightly. The previous table had been destroyed and melted down by her merciless abuse. Qin Gong said, "This lowly general is willing to fight." Zhanjiang Pass wasn't the Nie family's backyard. She could come and go as she pleased. She had to catch up with him and beat him up. Chapter 1527. There is no movement from Lu Shi's side. Did he see through our plan? Fan Chen was very panicked, but Wei Yong was not in a hurry. He could only suppress his anxiety. How did she see through it? Wei Yong's eyebrows did not even rise as he sneered. Other than a few trusted generals who participated in the battle, no one else knows about this. They all think that the Nie family is in chaos and the young master is in trouble. In this kind of situation, if Lu Shi can escape... Wei Yong paused suspiciously for a moment, disdain appearing in the depths of his eyes. Then, this is probably fate. You never believed in this. Fan Chen and Wei Yong had a good relationship and had a certain understanding of the latter. Ever since the previous master Niel Yang died of illness, Wei Yong had changed. Fan Chen could not say exactly what had changed, but it was definitely not a good change. Fan Chen expressed his understanding of this. In the mortal world, boring bodies were everywhere, and interesting souls were 1 in 10,000. How rare was it to meet someone who understood him? After the previous master Niel Yang died of illness, while Wei Yong had not reached the level of broken zither and broken string, he had been somewhat disheartened. If the previous master had not entrusted his son Nye Qing to Wei Yong before he died, Wei Yong would have wanted to retire. Fan Chun was not making this up. Just from how Wei Yong addressed Nye Qing and Ye Liang, he could tell. Everyone had changed to address Nye Qing as Lord. Only Wei Yong stubbornly called him young master. He was clearly unwilling to accept the reality of Nye Liang's death. If Nye Qing was not Wei Yong's son-in-law and student, and the two were like father and son, just this address would have thoroughly offended Nye Qing. The old master had died of illness and been buried, but the old subject was still unwilling to accept reality. Where did Wei Yong plan to place the new master? No matter how broad-minded a person, once they reached this position, Nye Qing could not completely ignore it. Even if it was just a little dissatisfaction over time, it would be enough to destroy the friendship between Nye Qing and Wei Yong. Thinking of this, Fan Chun reminded in a low voice to prevent Wei Yong from stepping on a landmine in the future. The previous master has passed away for a long time, and Zi Shun is a reasonable person. No matter how good your relationship with the present Lord, you are not biological father and son. The way you address me, you should change it. Don't embarrass the Lord. Out of the corner of his eyes, Wei Yong glanced at the orange afterglow on the horizon. His lips were tightly pursed, and he seemed a little stubborn. Fan Chun said, "The previous Lord has already left." By doing this, other than making others look at the Lord differently and suspect that the Lord's position was not obtained through proper means, there is no other meaning. If someone uses this to make a big deal out of it, not only will Her Highness be passive, but you won't be able to get anything out of it either. Wei Yun said, "My lord hasn't really left yet." Fan Chen's heart jumped. The previous master wasn't dead? But, Wei Yong added, the scheme he set up before his death hasn't ended. How can you say that he's gone? Next time, speak more swiftly and finish it in one breath. Fan Chen nearly choked on his words as he grumbled, "You almost scared me to death." Wei Yong said calmly, "When this matter is over, Yong will personally apologize to the young master." Fan Chen laughed. "You are still so stubborn." On the other hand, Jiang Pingji had investigated more evidence that the Nye camp was preparing to withdraw its troops. Although the camp was still there and the patrolling troops were normal, the scouts secretly discovered that these patrolling soldiers appeared very frequently. A certain soldier with a scar on his face appeared 3 times in a short period of an hour. Obviously, the enemy wanted to use this to create the illusion that there were sufficient soldiers in the camp to cover up the fact that they were secretly withdrawing their troops. Qiguan Rang said, "In that case, Wei Yong's letter of challenge is also trying to cover it up. If they really waited for the agreed time to send out the troops, perhaps the enemy's camp would have already been emptied and they would have directly stood them up." Bai Ning stepped forward and cupped his fists. "Time waits for no man. My lord, please make a decision soon." If she hesitated any longer, they would be completely exposed. Jiang Pingji closed her eyes and pondered. She was still hesitant and did not immediately give the order to send out the troops. Given Jiang Pingji's overly decisive character, this was extremely rare. Qiguan Rang asked her, "My lord, do you suspect that something is wrong?" "I can't put my feelings into words. I just feel that it's too smooth, and it's somewhat surreal." Jiang Pingji said, "The Nye clan mightily brought more than 200,000 troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass, but now they have to flee pathetically because of the internal strife. I always feel that it's very dramatic." Jiang Pingji thought for a long time before she found such a word to describe the current situation. The Nye clan had really attacked Zhanjiang Pass a few times, and Jiang Pingji had successfully stopped them. In the end, neither side gained any benefits. Jiang Pingji's side suffered great losses, but the Nye clan's side suffered little. Nye Liang had already folded in. Qiguan Rang said, "The battlefield is like this. Opportunities are fleeting. The Nye clan doesn't have the upper hand and there's internal strife. It's reasonable for them to withdraw their troops." "That's true." Jiang Pingji no longer hesitated. She successively gave several orders, and the generals stepped forward one by one. The tent was filled with a tense atmosphere of impending war. According to the scouts' investigation, the Nye camp's army had unusual movements in the middle of the night. It was calm during the day, so they most likely took advantage of the cover of the night to retreat in batches. Jiang Pingji set the timing for the battle at midnight to attack and pursue the enemy at night. Night fell quietly. On the other side, the General Qin Gong polished the weapons in his hands over and over again until they were shiny. The warhorses were also fed with horse fodder. Bai Ning laughed and teased Qin Gong. "You don't look like you're going to war. You look more like a handsome man meeting a beautiful woman in the middle of the night." Qin Gong was considered young among the people, but Bai Ning did not take advantage of his seniority. Instead, he treated him as an equal, so they had a good relationship. "General Bai, what are you talking about?" Qin Gong blushed. "I already have someone I like. It's easy to cause misunderstandings by saying these things." Bai Ning laughed. "She's not here. No matter how much I joke, she won't hear it." Qin Gong said seriously, "Even so, if I echo General Bai's words, it'll be too frivolous for her." Bai Ning curled his lips and said, "Fine, another papa ear." Qin Gong understood what papa ear meant, and he blushed a little. Bai Ning smiled and rested his hand on Qin Gong's shoulder. He joked, "When do you plan to get married? Let me attend the wedding banquet." Qin Gong raised a flag for the masses. "When this battle is over, she'll be of marriageable age. After I ask her elders for their opinion, I'll apply for leave from the Lord to prepare for the wedding." Although Su Yanxiao's parents and uncles had passed away, her eldest aunt and cousins were still alive. The Su family also had other members. If Su Yanxiao wanted to get married, those people had the right to know even if they didn't have the right to decide. Qin Gong's family had always been a vassal of the Su family. Su Yanxiao was the daughter of Su Fei, a direct branch of the Su family. If she really married him, there would definitely be people who would be dissatisfied. However, Qin Gong was not afraid of this. If Su Yanxiao was willing to marry him, he would protect her for life. Bai Ning laughed. "There are many marriages in the world. You're lucky. Don't forget about the wedding banquet." Qin Gong said shyly, "Of course I won't forget. General Bai, you must drink until you're drunk." Chapter 1528. What's there to say? Jiang Pingji passed by in her military uniform. Her sharp ears overheard their conversation, so she interrupted and asked. Bai Ning laughed. "Feng Jing is preparing to marry a beautiful lady. He'll be hosting a banquet. He wants me to go and drink until I'm drunk." Jiang Pingji glanced at Qin Gong. He had a bright and warm smile on his face. She could tell that he was in a good mood. Don't say things like, "I'm going to get married after the war, wife and children will warm the Kong bed." Jiang Pingji also learned about the certain death flag from the audience. It was common in dramas and movies. The main character who spoke would definitely die. The purpose was to set off the tragic atmosphere. Even though Jiang Pingji herself had raised countless flags, it was indeed inauspicious to say such things before the war. Qin Gong asked in surprise, "There's a saying for this?" Jiang Pingji said, "I don't know where I heard it, but those who said such things before the war basically never came back." Qin Gong's face turned pale. Bai Ning patted his shoulder and said in a rough voice, "Don't be afraid. Just spit a few times and take it back." It was originally a joke, but he didn't expect that Qin Gong would actually learn to do it seriously. He looked very cute. Jiang Pingji could not help but be speechless. "I lied to you. You two actually believed it." Qin Gong opened his innocent eyes wide, seeing that Jiang Pingji could not continue doing evil. She asked, "Do you really plan to marry Lady Su after the war?" Qin Gong nodded. He was immediately stunned. He asked her, "How did you know it was her, my lord?" Jiang Pingji asked in return, "If it wasn't for this intention, you wouldn't have to take care of everything even if she's the daughter of your former lord, right?" "That's what I think." Qin Gong said, "After the war, I'll marry her. I can take care of her in the future. It's killing two birds with one stone." Even though Jiang Pingji did not mistreat the children of defeated vassals, she could not stand the tripping of her subordinates. Since the successive defeats of Su Fei and Su Pei, the Su family, which used to be like the sun in the sky, had completely quietened down. If Su Fei and his wife were still alive, as the daughter of a vassal, Su Yanxiao's marriage would definitely be top-notch. Now that Su Yanxiao's parents were dead and her immediate family was no longer around, Su Yanxiao's marriage fell into the hands of her eldest aunt. Eldest aunt didn't treat Su Yanxiao harshly, but she wasn't as attentive and loving as her mother. Marriage was even more out of the question. Most of the time, she would be married to the legitimate son of a small aristocratic family. If she was unlucky, she might even be married to a commoner who had recently risen to power. Once she got married, Qin Gong would have to avoid arousing suspicion and would not be able to protect her. Rather than worrying like this, it would be better to just marry her. He would treat her like a treasure. Qin Gong was Jiang Pingji's trusted general. If Su Yanxiao married him, no one would dare to underestimate her in the future. Jiang Pingji smiled. I'm so envious. Qin Gong was puzzled. Is my lord envious of this general? Jiang Pingji said, it's good to be young. Isn't it enviable? Qin Gong was confused. He didn't know what was so enviable about being young. This had nothing to do with what his lord had said before. But he could also tell that his lord was very much in favor of his marriage with Su Yanxiao. This made Qin Gong heave a sigh of relief. He wasn't afraid of anything else, but he was afraid that his lord wouldn't agree. If that happened, Qin Gong would be in a difficult position. He could either give up on Su Yanxiao or resign and live in seclusion. If he asked himself honestly, the possibility of him choosing the latter was higher. Remember to leave a cup of wedding wine for me. Qin Gong smiled. Yes, my lord. While they were chatting, the army was ready to set off. Jiang Pingji mounted her horse. My lord, what are you doing? Qin Gong was shocked. Was his lord going too? It's not good to be idle all the time. My bones are getting hard, Jiang Pingji said. Let's set off. Qin Gong was speechless. Was it really because of this willful reason? Qin Gong missed his old lord Su Fei very much. Although Su Fei wasn't very smart, he wouldn't be so bold as to rush to the front lines. The army set off in 3 directions. Jiang Pingji's expression was not very good. Her brows were tightly knitted. She led the army and set off naturally not because she wanted to fight a war. She just had a bad premonition. This was a kind of natural intuition that had been honed through countless life and death experiences. It was hard to explain, but this intuition had saved her many times. The army quietly approached the enemy's camp. The scouts who set off first quickly returned with news. Reporting to my lord, the enemy's camp is empty. The shadows in the tents are all straw branches. Judging from the ashes of the bonfire in the camp, they should have left less than 15 minutes ago. They split into 3 directions to outflank the enemy's camp, but they didn't expect the enemy to have already retreated. Qin Gong and Bai Ning each led a group of troops. When they heard the scouts' report, they immediately gave the order to chase after them. The enemy left in a hurry. They left some heavy and clumsy military supplies and rations in the camp that were not suitable to be taken away. It could be seen that the enemy left in a hurry. If they caught up with the enemy at this time, they would definitely win a great victory when the enemy was unprepared. Jiang Pingji felt that something was wrong. Her troops did not move. She asked the scout, "How's the bonfire?" The scout said, "Some are still burning, some have been extinguished. It's a mess." Jiang Pingji asked again, "What about the footprints near the bonfire?" The scout recalled carefully and reported truthfully. The footprints near the bonfire were a little messy. Jiang Pingji asked a few more questions in succession, such as the layout of the enemy's camp. The more she listened, the more she frowned. The general who was sent by the military counselors to protect his lord was puzzled. He asked, "My lord, is there something wrong?" Jiang Pingji grabbed the reins and said coldly, "There are many things wrong." They had the energy to prepare straw branches to disguise as human shadows. It can be seen that they were quite calm when they retreated. If that's the case, the bonfire, documents, and objects shouldn't be so messy. The general's heart turned cold after he heard that. He exclaimed, "Could it be a trap?" Jiang Pingji sneered. "I'm afraid we've been fooled. Send 2 groups of troops to recall Qin Gong and the others. I'm afraid there's an ambush ahead." the general asked. Don't we need to send troops to support them? Jiang Pingji smiled. We should also welcome our guests. Let's deal with the enemy first. Give the order, get into formation and face the enemy. Not long after Jiang Pingji finished speaking, the enemy's battle cries suddenly rang out in the previously empty enemy's camp. They seemed to have appeared out of thin air. Arrows rained down from the sky. The enemy's sneak attack was astonishingly fast. Many people were hit before they could react. They're hiding underground. Jiang Pingji revealed how the enemy appeared out of thin air in one sentence. It wasn't that there was no one in the camp. They were all hiding underground. Because the camp was very messy, it was impossible for the soldiers to move the items and check them one by one. As long as the soldiers spread out their sleeping mats and covered the holes where they were hiding, they would basically not be discovered. Chapter 1529. What are you waiting for? Let's go back. Jiang Pingji pulled out her god-slaying sword. Her eyes were fierce. The deputy general said, Yes, sir. Jiang Pingji wanted to rush out and kill to her heart's content, but she still needed to command the army to defend against the enemy's sneak attack and seize the opportunity to counterattack. The enemy seized the initiative. As soon as they arrived, they rained arrows and disrupted the army's formation. Under such circumstances, if there was no chief commander to command and dispatch, the casualties would be terrible when the enemy rushed in. Jiang Pingji was reckless, but she never delayed important matters. I wonder how Feng Jing and the others are doing. These troops were indeed elites who had been trained for many years. Jiang Pingji often arranged military exercises and rehearsed all kinds of unexpected situations. Therefore, even though the enemy seized the initiative this time, they reacted after the first wave of arrows. They shrank their formation and adopted a defensive formation. This was the method of minimizing losses. At the same time, it could reflect the true combat quality of an army. At the same time, the scouts sent by Jiang Pingji also desperately chased after Qin Gong and Bai Ning's troops. Unfortunately, it was night and visibility was limited. It took them a lot of effort to find the route of the two troops. They hurriedly chased after them, which wasted a lot of time. By the time they caught up with the two troops, the situation had changed. Bai Ning was cautious by nature. Even if he led the troops to chase after the enemy, he would still consider his surroundings. Therefore he was slower. When the scouts caught up, the army had not yet been ambushed. Bai Ning was also very surprised by the appearance of the scouts. The scouts did not have time to turn over and dismount from their horses. They directly conveyed the order. Retreat. Bai Ning was stunned at first, then he immediately understood something. He immediately ordered the army to turn around and retreat. However, the enemy was secretly watching them. The army's retreat was obvious, so they could not sit still. The originally pitch-black hall suddenly lit up with countless orange flames, and countless fire arrows descended from the sky. Bai Ning was shocked, but he still looked calm on the surface. The soldiers also seemed to have taken a tranquilizer. They defended and retreated in an orderly manner at the same time. Was he not panicking? How could it be? He was panicking to death. He never thought that this was a trap set by the enemy. However, Bai Ning knew that as the chief commander, he could not panic. Once he panicked, the army would be like headless flies. They would run around without order and be surrounded and killed by the enemy sooner or later. If Bai Ning's luck was considered good, then Qin Gong's side was quite unlucky. He had completely stepped into the enemy's trap. When the scouts arrived, the scene was already in chaos. The two armies were fighting each other. The light of the fire spread, almost turning this part of the world into daylight. The soldiers' battle cries were sharp and resounding, as if they were about to pierce through one's eardrums. The enemy's sneak attack was quite sudden. Although Qin Gong was not injured, he remembered the time when he followed Yang Si and was blocked by Han Yu in the Longtime Canyon. He couldn't help but laugh bitterly. What kind of lousy luck did he have to be ambushed time and time again? It used to be Han Yu, and now it was Wei Yong. However, they were lucky to have been saved by the Lord last time. Now, they could only rely on themselves and the soldiers around them. If he didn't fight for a way out, he would probably be buried here. At this moment, Qin Gong was still thinking about what his lord had said before he sent out the troops. It's better not to say things like, "I'm going to get married after this battle, so that my wife and children can stay by my side." I don't know where I heard this before, but those who said this before the war basically never came back. Never to return? The enemy had set up this sneak attack with the intention of making them never come back. Qin Gong didn't want to die here. He still had to make contributions and accumulate merits, so that he could go back and marry the eldest lady of the Su family and protect her for the rest of her life. In the distant rear, Su Yanxiao suddenly woke up in the middle of the night. The maid who was sleeping outside put on some clothes and came over. Is the eldest lady going to get up at night? When the maid brought the candle closer, she saw that Su Yanxiao's nightgown was almost soaked with sweat. "No, I just had a very scary dream, but now that I'm awake, I can't remember what it was," the maid also said. "Look at the eldest lady's face covered with sweat. It must have been a nightmare. I'm going to ask the kitchen to prepare a bowl of soup for you." Su Yanxiao shook her head. "No, it's the middle of the night. I won't be able to sleep after drinking soup." The maid said, "If that's the case, I'll stay and talk with the eldest lady for a while." Su Yanxiao nodded lightly. The maid beside her was sent by Qin Gong. She was careful, considerate, and efficient. She quite liked her. When she thought of Qin Gong, an unexplainable panic rose in her left chest. "Eldest lady, are you feeling uncomfortable?" The maid saw her raising her hand to cover her chest, frowning slightly, and her lips pale. She suddenly became nervous. Su Yanxiao said, "The dream I had just now seemed to be related to Qin Sanlang. Did something happen to him at the front?" Since the two of them had a tacit understanding, Su Yanxiao changed the way she addressed him and called him Qin Sanlang. It was neither too intimate nor too distant. The maid said, "Old people always say that dreams are the opposite of reality." Qin Langjun is good at fighting. How could something happen to him? Su Yanxiao was skeptical, but she still felt uneasy. The maid tried to coax her to sleep. Su Yanxiao couldn't help but put her hand under the pillow, and her fingertips touched a cold jade hairpin. "I learned it from the craftsman. This fox hairpin is crudely carved. When the war at the front is over, I'll give it to the eldest lady." Su Yanxiao couldn't help but hold it tightly, as if it could absorb some strength. "You said you would come back and marry me." She had been embroidering a wedding dress these days, and it would be finished in half a year, just in time for her hairpin ceremony. After that, they would get married. The maid heard her whisper and laughed. Apart from the eldest lady, who else could Qin Langjun have in his heart? Su Yanxiao couldn't help but blush, and her flustered mood calmed down a lot. The situation on Qin Gong's side was indeed not that bad. Relying on the valiant fighting quality of the army, even if the enemy's attack was fierce, they could still maintain their formation and not collapse. As the battle dragged on, the situation gradually stabilized. After all, Qin Gong was immortal, and he couldn't be invulnerable. He was seriously injured in the chaos, but he didn't seem to feel it. He commanded the enemy to kill, and seized the opportunity to break out of the encirclement. "We shouldn't continue fighting. Since this is the enemy's trap, the longer we delay, the more disadvantageous it will be for us." Qin Gong was injured, but his mind was very clear. In the face of the enemy's ambush, they could only try to reduce their losses. Of the 36 stratagems, retreat is the best. The deputy general on the side said, "General, do you feel that something is wrong?" Qin Gong covered his arm, and his expression was somewhat fierce. "The number of the enemy's troops is strange. They most likely divided their troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass. Since this was a killing trap set by the enemy, it meant that the previous retreat of the Nie family due to internal strife was fake. The enemy still had more than 200,000 troops. Even if they divided their troops into 3 groups, the number of troops lying in ambush was obviously not that many. It was not difficult to speculate that the enemy was very likely to transfer the remaining troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass. Luring the enemy into the trap, luring the tiger away from the mountain, one was linked to the other, and it was clearly a killing trap. The deputy general said, "General, what should we do?" Chapter 1530. I've long heard that Lu Shi has many elites under his command, but I didn't expect that we couldn't keep them here. Fan Chen watched as the enemy fought and retreated, and his heart was filled with impatience and indescribable helplessness. If it had been any other vassal's army, they would have long been thrown into disarray after encountering such an ambush. Not to mention retreating in a short period of time, it was already a blessing from the heavens that the entire army had not been wiped out. Comparisons were odious. Was Jiang Pingji born to teach other feudal vassals how to behave? Jiang Pingji was not only the legendary child of another family, but also the lord of another family. There was nothing to be envious of. The trusted general in charge of the ambush rode forward and asked Fan Chen's opinion with a solemn expression. Military counselor, should we pursue them? Of course. Zixuan has given a strict order to delay as much time as possible. Fan Chen raised his hand to wipe the hot sweat from his forehead. His inner shirt, which was stuck to his neck, was drenched. He said, Lu Shi's subordinates are all clever. I guess they've discovered that the number of troops ambushing them isn't right. Even if they think with their toes, they'll know that we'll deploy troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass. Sir, the general didn't dare to waste time. He ordered the troops to pursue the enemy. They couldn't let the enemy ruin their plan. General, they're catching up. The deputy general's face was covered in blood. Only his black eyes were clean. Don't panic. Just fight and retreat. Qin Gong's expression was firm. His face was covered in blood, making the brown scar on his face look even more terrifying. Is that Nye camp ahead? When we left, the fire wasn't so strong. The deputy general said, General, do you mean there are enemies over there? Qin Gong's expression was solemn. The Lord is ambushed over there. We have to rush there no matter what. According to the scouts sent by the Lord, she was ambushed at Nye camp. However, Nye camp had long been empty. Where did the ambush come from? After thinking about it, Qin Gong thought of the underground. The enemy was most likely hiding underground and hiding from the eyes and ears of our army. However, how did they hide the soil from our scouts when they dug so many pits to hide people? The person who arranged this ambush was truly terrifying. Whether it was in terms of scheming a person's heart or in other aspects, it was almost flawless. Si Jiang had a bad feeling when he heard this. The Lord had been ambushed in the enemy's lair. What kind of F***CK was that? Zhanjiang Pass? Not only was the deputy general worried about his lord, but he was also worried about his own nest. He was really worried that his nest would be destroyed. Qin Gong said confidently, Zhanjiang Pass has sufficient troops, and there are a few strategists overseeing it. We won't lose it. Due to the enemy's relentless pursuit, Qin Gong's side had to pay a few more casualties before they managed to shake off their pursuers. Along the way, they bumped into the remnants of Bai Ning's army. If they hadn't reacted in time, they might have had to fight in the dark. Brother Qin, you're not dead, right? Qin Gong smiled bitterly as he pulled out the arrow from his arm. He took out a piece of cloth and tied it around the wound, temporarily stopping the bleeding. He was in so much pain that his face was pale. He said in a loud voice, I'm not dead. I'm alive and kicking. Bai Ning said, reorganize the troops, turn around, and kill these bugs that are chasing us. Qin Gong panted heavily and said, the Lord has been ambushed. General Bai, it's better not to continue fighting. Bai Ning waved his hand and said casually, that's easy. Brother Qin, take half of the troops to support the Lord. I'll lead some people to delay the pursuers. At that moment, there was no better way. Qin Gong cupped his fists and said, General Bai, take care. No problem. Bai Ning laughed. I didn't get to drink your wedding wine and my precious daughter's wedding wine. When I go to hell, I'll make a scene. Qin Gong ordered half of the troops to support Jiang Pingji. Seeing that he had left, Bai Ning angrily spat out a mouthful of blood and clenched the blood-stained weapon in his hand. The sticky blood had dried up, and some of it was still warm. He shouted in the direction of the enemy. All troops, fall into formation. As soon as he finished speaking, the soldiers on the side raised their horns and blew them to convey the military order. As soon as the military order was given, the soldiers with shields lined up in the first echelon, forming a thick defensive wall on one side. The other hand held a long spear that was more than 10 feet long to block the first enemy that rushed up. The second echelon of soldiers also held long spears and assisted in cleaning up the fish that slipped through the net. The archers were in the third echelon, trying their best to seize the opportunity to cause heavy damage to the enemy. Bai Ning said in a gruff voice, "I'm standing here. No one can get past me." Although Bai Ning was not young, his archery skills were ranked among the best in the army. His specialty was shooting 7 arrows at the same time. He used a 2-stone heavy bow. When he shot an arrow, not only could he poke a hole in a person's head, but he could also skewer the next person. The eyes of the 2 sides were bloodshot. Bai Ning's quiver was out of ammunition, so he picked up his weapon and rushed forward. He killed until his weapon was bent. At the same time, the situation on Jiang Pingji's side was much better than Bai Ning and Qin Gong had imagined. Apart from the unexpected first wave of sneak attacks, they basically did not suffer much in the subsequent confrontations. People could not see the entire battle situation, but Jiang Pingji had a spiritual realm. Within the realm, even flying insects and mosquitoes were under her control, not to mention people. She knew where the army was the weakest, where they needed support, and where the enemy could break through. Under her command, the army calmly withdrew from the enemy's ambush. How could the enemy let go of a fat piece of meat that was already in their mouths? Of course, they would bite like mad dogs. "My lord, the reinforcements are here." Jiang Pingji frowned slightly. What's going on with the reinforcements? It was impossible for reinforcements to come at this time. Jiang Pingji was a very cautious person. Even if she led the army to attack the enemy, she was prepared for a sneak attack on her base. It was better to be safe than sorry. Even if all the information showed that Nie Liang did not have the opportunity to clean up the hidden dangers within the Nie family, Jiang Pingji had laughed at this point. At that time, she mocked Nie Liang for being too soft on his people, but in the end, he was the one who suffered the consequences. The last time she received news from the Nie family was only 3 to 5 days before Nie Liang died of illness. The few tumors of the Nie family were still alive and well. According to the time of Nie Liang's death, even if he instructed Wei Yong and the others to clean up the tumors before he died, it was reasonable to say that it was too late. Due to various reasons, Jiang Pingji was skeptical about the 2 speculations of internal strife in the Nie family and Wei Yong's withdrawal of troops. Now that they had encountered an ambush, it proved that the 2 speculations were false. Not only did Wei Yong not withdraw his troops, but it was very likely that he had mobilized his troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass. The ambush was just a ploy to delay the troops. Countless thoughts flashed through Jiang Pingji's mind. The soldier said, "The reinforcements were brought by General Qin." Not long after he finished speaking, Qin Gong, who was covered in blood, had already ridden forward. "My lord, are you all right?" "I'm fine." Jiang Pingji asked, "Did you meet General Bai on the way?" Chapter 1531. My lord, Zhanjiang Pass. Although Qin Gong looked confident, he was not sure if Zhanjiang Pass could be defended against a sneak attack. Jiang Pingji said, "Don't worry. I told Wen Zheng and the rest to be careful before the army set off. Zhanjiang Pass will definitely not be lost." Qin Gong was slightly relieved, but he still had doubts. Jiang Pingji noticed this and smiled to comfort him. "If Zhanjiang Pass is breached, I will hug the keyboard and kneel in front of the old chief until I die." Qin Gong was speechless. "Old chief? Keyboard? What the hell?" Jiang Pingji coughed softly and covered up her words perfectly. She was getting more and more adept at lying. "The old chief was the one who gave me the strange book in my dream. Later, he continued to teach me in my dream. He's like a teacher and a friend." Qin Gong suddenly realized. I see. What she said was not entirely false. The old chief had indeed trained her meticulously in the few years between choosing his successor and retiring. Teacher and friend. It was not wrong to use these words to describe their relationship. Jiang Pingji was a wolf. She was aggressive and liked to cause trouble. She wanted to challenge the authority and position of the alpha wolf all the time. The new and old chief often fought because of disagreements. The old chief was a man who looked like a smiling tiger but was tough on the inside. Jiang Pingji was tough and arrogant from the inside out. One was the alpha wolf who was about to retire, the other was the new alpha wolf. It would be strange if they did not fight. Of course, the old chief had been a commander for more than 100 years and had been through countless wars. Jiang Pingji was still a new driver on the road. Even if she could fight, she was tortured badly at first. Later on, she barely managed to fight to a draw. It was the only time they tied. Jiang Pingji suspected that the other party went easy on her. I'm leaving tomorrow. The 7th Army is the best army in the Federation. I hope you don't ruin its reputation. Jiang Pingji was so tired that she could not even move her fingers. Her mouth was still hard and smelly. The future belongs to more outstanding young people. The 7th Army will become stronger and sharper in my hands. No one will dare to offend me. Look at what she said. She was just short of saying that the other party was old and should have given up his position long ago. However, the old general smiled and said, "All right, I'll leave the faith of the 7th Army to you." The two women were sweating profusely as they lay on the training ground. Compared to Jiang Pingji's disheveled appearance, the other woman was still standing. I still don't know why the old general retired. You're not old enough to retire. The average lifespan of a commoner in the Federation was around 250 years. Someone like Jiang Pingji could live up to 500 years. At that time, the old chief was only a little more than 200. He was at the prime of his life. Otherwise, he would not have been able to suppress Jiang Pingji, who was an unreasonable wolf cub. In fact, this old commander's position in the Federation was second only to the marshal, and he was extremely experienced. Just because they had a lifespan of 500 years did not mean that they would live to be 500 years old. The average lifespan of a soldier in the army was less than 100 years old. Even though a legion commander was a high-ranking member of the army, it was still a high-risk job. 99% of legion commanders died on the front lines. Very few of them died of old age, let alone retire midway. At that time, many people even mocked the First Battle Legion for producing a coward who was afraid of death. My body is not suited to stay in this position. It looks fine now, but I don't know when it will collapse. You'll know the inside story when you have a higher level of authority. The old chief sighed. The 7th Legion has always been the vanguard with the strongest combat power. I won't be able to hold on for long, but the 7th Legion must have a capable and unyielding successor who can carry the flag. Jiang Pingji was speechless. Was it because she was the best at fighting? If the old chief's current combat state was not good, then what about when he was at his peak? The more she thought about it, the more annoyed she became. The old chief sneered. What are you thinking about? I'm thinking about when I'll be able to press you to the ground and beat you up. Heh, you went easy on me just now. The amount of water you used was comparable to a dam releasing water. Was she a salted fish that needed to go easy on him? You haven't awakened yet. Even if my condition has deteriorated, I won't lose to a girl who hasn't awakened yet. Jiang Pingji looked at the rising flames in the Nye camp. She did not know why she thought of the past. At that time, she was too tired. She was exhausted after the fierce battle. In the end, the old chief carried her to the warm cabin like a burlap sack. When she woke up, the old chief had already packed his things and left the military headquarters. Jiang Pingji was in a hurry to take office. The front line of the Federation was at war again, so she forgot about this matter. Now that she thought about it, she suddenly remembered something. What the hell did the old chief mean by awakening? It was fine if she did not remember, but now that she remembered, she had to clarify. It was the same logic as obsessive-compulsive disorder. She would feel uncomfortable if she did not clarify. However, before that, there was one more thing to do. Jiang Pingji took Qin Gong and the troops under her tent to rescue Bai Ning. Bai Ning was in a sorry state at that moment. His arms and thighs were injured, and the armor on his body was tattered. Many parts of the armor were pockmarked by the enemy's weapons. If it was not for the fact that the armor was well made and that he had been injured by Ning a few times, he would have been dismounted and trampled into meat paste by the chaotic army. He did not have time to check the condition of his wound. After killing a wave of enemies in a hurry, he used a strip of cloth to stop the bleeding. His left hand was almost numb. Their side suffered heavy casualties, but the enemy did not gain much advantage either. The number of casualties was also high. However, because of the disparity in military strength, Bai Ning's side could not hold on for much longer. Once the army's formation was broken by the enemy, the result would be 1,000 miles of retreat and they would be crushed into meat paste by the enemy. Let's fight to the death with these bastards. It's not a loss to die here. Bai Ning's eyes were bloodshot. Even though he was injured all over, he did not care. Kill one to recoup his losses, kill two to earn a small profit. Even if he died, he would drag a few more down with him. Just as Bai Ning was about to launch the last attack, the enemy ordered the archers to release a rain of arrows again. In the end, an unexpected turn of events occurred. Because it was nighttime, the pale golden ripples that shrouded the army were particularly clear. A miracle? Nie Jun saw this, and his high and mighty momentum instantly dropped. The arrows stopped in midair as if they were intercepted by the layer of ripples. They lost their momentum and fell with a rustle, hitting Bai Ning's head. My lord is here? He had seen this scene before, and he was sure that it was his lord. Is his life more important than yours? Jiang Pengji led the troops over. When she saw Bai Ning's sorry state, she suddenly became angry. Are a bunch of good-for-nothings worth paying with your life? Jiang Pengji reprimanded Bai Ning angrily. Bai Ning was prepared to fight to the death, but now that his lord was here, he did not know what expression to put on. He could only listen to the reprimand obediently. Little did he know that his seemingly majestic lord was also being reprimanded by another person. You Abba, you were ambushed and attacked. Where is your spiritual realm? Jiang Pengji quibbled, I didn't want to cheat too much, so my realm only covered a few feet around me. You Abba, it's obvious that you've been pretending to be a pig to eat a tiger for too long. What's the use of these excuses? The old chief's mouth is quite sharp. You Abba, if you return to the Federation in this state, won't the 7th Army be assimilated into a pig farm? Not using too much ability doesn't mean that you have to be schemed against like real people in ancient times. Jiang Xiaojiu, I've prepared the keyboard for you. Chapter 1532. My lord. Bai Ning clearly felt that his lord's mood was not right. He didn't dare to raise his voice for fear of igniting the firecracker. Jiang Pengji gripped the hilt of her sword tightly and sneered, order the soldiers to get into formation and face the enemy. Tonight no one can leave. Bai Ning's body trembled, and his voice was like thunder. Yes, my lord. Ordinary soldiers couldn't feel it, but Qin Gong and Bai Ning, who were near Jiang Pengji, were secretly shocked. Most of the generals who had some achievements in martial arts could feel qi, such as the enemy's murderous aura and the murderous intent in the dark. Their awareness combined with their reflexes, which had been trained for a long time, allowed them to avoid many fatal attacks. The stronger their martial arts, the clearer their perception. There was no doubt that Qin Gong, who became famous at a young age, and Bai Ning, who was experienced and ruthless, belonged to this category. They clearly felt a strong murderous intent emanating from their lord's body. Not only did they feel uncomfortable, but the warhorses around them were also affected. Bai Ning didn't care about the injuries on his body. He was speechless and said, My God, how many people has my lord killed? To cultivate such a murderous aura, it was probably not enough to kill 1,000 people. She probably needed to kill 10,000 people. No matter how many times he tried, Bai Ning couldn't associate his lord, who was usually playful, angry, and talkative, with her decisive killing on the battlefield. It was like he couldn't bear to see Li Hanmei kill people on the battlefield with a gun and go home to pick up a sweater to knit. Jiang Pengji acted as if she didn't hear Bai Ning's complaints. She gave several military orders in a row. The enemies who caught up were shocked when they saw the formation. Some of the generals couldn't help but sneer. Are the troops under Lu Shi's command indulging in fantasy? Isn't that right? Now they're like stray dogs. How can a group of defeated generals and soldiers make a comeback? Some people sneered. Naturally, there were also people who were secretly shocked. Some even had the idea of fighting back. The reinforcements who arrived late didn't see it, but the first batch of soldiers who surrounded Bai Ning saw a miracle again. The sky full of arrows was blocked by a layer of strange golden ripples. The gods had personally participated in the battle. They were just a group of ordinary people. Could they defeat the gods? Thus, one wave of soldiers had high morale, while the other wave had low morale. When the two were compared, the effect was very obvious. No matter how the general scolded them, the group of soldiers did not dare to move forward. Some of them even muttered things like, "God is coming," and "God will curse us to death." Their legs were trembling and their hands were weak. They were so scared that they pushed back. Seeing this, the general could only attack angrily. He chopped off the heads of 3 or 4 deserters, intimidating the group of soldiers in an instant. Whoever dares to take a step back will end up like this. The soldiers at the front were still dealing with the enemy, but these cowards actually wanted to desert. It was better for them to die so as not to affect the morale of the army. The soldier cried, "It's not that we want to escape. It's obviously that God is here. God is here. Arrows can't hurt them." The general sneered, "Can't injure him?" Spouting nonsense and disturbing the morale of the army, this is a crime worthy of death. After saying that, the general cut off the soldier's head. Because he used a lot of strength, he even cut off half of the soldier's upper body. After killing more than 10 people in a row, the chaos was finally suppressed. The cowardly soldiers could only charge forward again. The general revealed a disdainful sneer and shook off the warm blood on the blade. What can't hurt them? If they had this ability, what happened to those enemy soldiers who died tragically because of their sneak attack? The two armies fought fiercely and both sides suffered casualties. Didn't they see that the enemy not only had the corpses of their own soldiers, but also the corpses of the enemy soldiers? It's just a cheap trick to shake the morale of the army. What happened at the front line? Fan Chen came late and did not see the miracle. He only saw some of the soldiers being afraid to fight and disrupting the army formation, so he sent people out to suppress them. The general cupped his fists and reported, "It's just the enemy deliberately mystifying things, using some miracle to scare people." Fan Chen raised his eyebrows. "Miracle? What miracle?" The general roughly explained the process. Fan Chen frowned after listening. Is there something wrong?" the general asked. Fan Chen suddenly thought of something. His expression was faintly excited, and the hand holding the reins trembled slightly. His breathing was rapid and excited, and he almost lost his voice. "Maybe Lu Shi is also here." The general's eyes widened as if he did not hear what Fan Chen said. What did he mean by, "Lu Shi is also here"? Fan Chen said, "Lu Shi is a person with unparalleled combat power. According to investigations, during the 3 years she was studying in Langya County, she often fought fiercely with others. Now that she has become a duke, she still does not change her bad habits. She goes to the front line to fight generals, and even more, she even wants to get involved in a chaotic battle between 2 armies." This was not the first time the general had heard this, but he always found it unbelievable. Why did the people always say, "Good men don't become soldiers, good women don't marry"? It was not only because being a soldier was lowly and difficult to stand out, but also because the survival rate was low. No one wanted to bring up their own son or new husband to fight on the battlefield. From this, it could be seen how touching the survival rate was and how dangerous the battle between the 2 armies was. Dignified dukes actually fought in a chaotic battle like ordinary soldiers. What would happen if they were mistakenly killed in front of the battle? Not to mention dukes, ordinary generals would not personally participate in a chaotic battle. Even if they participated in the battle to kill, they would bring 20 to 30 bodyguards with them. Soldiers were easy to find, but generals who knew how to fight were not easy to find. Every one of them was considered a gold mine, and they could not be lost. Generals were like this, let alone dukes? Lu Shi left Zhangjiang Pass? Fan Chen sneered. That so-called miracle has only appeared twice. According to the thinking of the ancients, not everyone could be blessed by the gods. They only knew of Jiangpingji. It was the same miracle, So could it be confirmed that Jiang Pingji was also at the front line? If that was the case, Fan Chen could not easily let her go. Jiang Pingji still had no heir. If she died here, the power she left behind would definitely collapse. Fan Chen was secretly calculating, but Jiang Pingji, the person in question, seemed to be on steroids. She killed people so quickly that even her own people were afraid. The enemies in front of her were not like living people, but more like straws in the field. She was not holding a sickle to cut straws, she was clearly driving a reaper to reap the heads of rows of people. This was not the scariest thing. The scariest thing was that after killing so many people, her eyes were still clear. What did this prove? It only proved that the enemies were not human in her eyes. Perhaps they were not even comparable to chickens and ducks. Ordinary people would feel uncomfortable killing too many chickens. Fortunately, this person was their lord and not their enemy. Because it was dark at night and their field of vision was limited, Fan Chen and the others had not noticed this area. He ordered the troops to split up and attack the rear. As soon as the troops were mobilized, Jiang Pingji knew his plan. Feng Jing, go to the rear and command. The enemies are coming. She retreated after killing for a while. As soon as she approached, Qin Gong smelled the suffocating smell of blood. Yes. Chapter 1533. As soon as Fan Chen moved, Jiang Pingji knew that the sneak attack from the rear had failed. Instead, they had lost a lot of troops. I wonder how the battle at Zhanjiang Pass is. Jiang Pingji was already covered in blood. She looked terrifying, but the blood belonged to the enemy. Not even a strand of her hair was missing. There was a beep next to her ear. The old chief had sent her a private message. Your Abba, if you want to know what's going on over there, just use your spiritual realm. Don't tell me you're that weak. Jiang Pingji had transmigrated and changed into an ordinary person's body. It was understandable that her physical skills had declined, but it was not to the extent that her spiritual realm was weak. Lu Shi is an ordinary person. Excessive use of the spiritual realm will cause harm to this body. Besides, I haven't used it for years. I can't remember it now. Jiang Pingji smiled awkwardly. Her smile was covered by blood. Sincerity could not be seen. Instead, there was a hint of ferocity. It's not a good thing to be at ease for too long. I'm really worried that I won't be able to adapt to the pace of the Federation in the future. Although she said that, she still used her spiritual realm to take a look at the battle at Zhanjiang Pass. The city gate was secure. It had not been lost. The enemy had not succeeded yet. She quickly retracted it after taking a look. At the same time, Wei Ci looked in a certain direction outside Zhanjiang Pass. His eyes showed some confusion. Just now I seem to have sensed the Lord. Was it an illusion? There were 150,000 enemies outside Zhanjiang Pass. Their battle cries shook the heavens. Flames soared into the sky and lit up the place until it was a city that never slept. With the previous lesson, Wei Ci had brought enough troops and hundreds of catapults. The power of the siege was far greater than the previous time. As the saying goes, soldiers with arms and water with earth. No matter how many catapults the enemy had, the city gate was still secure. It was just that the battle on the city wall was particularly fierce. The stench of kerosene stimulated everyone's nerves. In everyone's eyes, there was nothing else but the enemy. Tonight, it was either the enemy or they who would die. What a tough bone to chew. He can still defend in this situation. The general of the Nye camp looked at the city wall covered with ladders and ropes. His expression was full of malice and ferocity. His black eyes were reflected by the flames. Wei Ci said, Lu Shi's vigilance is far beyond our imagination. If a sudden attack was launched, the defending side would not be prepared and would most likely be flustered. According to Nye Liang's plan before his death, Jiang Pingji was confident that she would dispatch the army to pursue the bait they had thrown out. The garrison at Zhanjiang Pass would be greatly weakened. They took advantage of the night to attack the city, and the enemy hastily responded. Faced with the Nye family's army that went all out, even if Jiang Pingji's side could resist for a while, they would definitely not be able to defend Zhanjiang Pass. In order to protect themselves, They could only lead their troops to abandon the pass and retreat. The result was a huge disappointment. Wei Long led his troops to attack Zhanjiang Pass. Although the enemy hastily responded to the battle, they did not immediately collapse. Reinforcements arrived just in time. Jiang Pingji was far more cautious and meticulous than he and Ye Yang had imagined. She was clearly a 22 or 23-year-old woman, but her way of doing things was more cautious and cunning than a 45-year-old man. She had already believed the news of Nie Jun's retreat, and in the end, she even ordered Zhanjiang Pass to be on high alert to prevent night attacks. He really didn't know whether he should say that she was doing something superfluous, or praise her for being as cunning as a fox, treacherous and suspicious. The general said fiercely, "So what if we're vigilant? We must pass this trial tonight." This time, Nie Jun was determined to take down Zhanjiang Pass. If they did not succeed this time, they did not know when the next opportunity would come. Of course, we must pass Zhanjiang Pass tonight. No matter what price they had to pay. Looking at the huge fireballs being hurled by the catapults onto the walls of Zhanjiang Pass, the battlements, and even the city gates, Wei Long's state of mind was extremely calm. That Shizhong is still somewhat useful. Shizhong had been randomly slashed a few times by bandits with a hatchet. His right hand could not write for a short period of time. The wound on his cheek was too deep, causing his left eye to be completely blind. There was also an extremely long wound from his left shoulder to his collarbone. With such a serious injury, even if he had amazing willpower to copy and memorize the blueprint, his hands were not strong enough. He could not draw such a detailed blueprint at all. Since he could not draw, he thought of a plan and simply verbally explained. He verbally improved the existing armaments, such as coating the stones of the catapults with a layer of kerosene and igniting them before they were hurled. The lethality of fireballs and simple stones was not the same. After Shizhong's improvements, the catapults did indeed cause great pressure to the pass. Without Jiang Pingji, the godly archer, and due to the weather, the soldiers controlling the ballistae could not effectively destroy the enemy's catapults. After such a long time, they had only destroyed 4 or 5 catapults. In desperation, Wei Ci could only order the catapults on the city walls to aim at the enemy's catapults. The efficiency was much higher than destroying the catapults with the ballistae. At the same time, they could also target the enemy's archers. There was still a stalemate above and below the city walls. For the time being, Zhanjiang Pass was not in danger of being lost. Jiang Pingji's side was much more relaxed. Even if the enemy outnumbered them, with her precise command, she could always make the enemy suffer losses. Not only that, she also took the time to ask the old chief about it, lest she forgot about it after the war. I remember before the old chief retired, he once mentioned awakening. What is that? You Abba, you're still half-hearted in war. If your subordinates knew about this, how would they feel? Don't change the topic. There was silence on the other side for a while, as if she had to rack her brains to think of a few sentences. You Abba, about this matter? Sigh, the child has no mother. It's a long story. Make the long story short. You Abba, the current power system of the Federation focuses on developing the limits of the human body. The key lies in the genes. Under normal circumstances, the genes of ordinary people will evolve with the development of inheritance from generation to generation. However, some geniuses can condense the evolution of hundreds or even thousands of years into a few short years. This is genetic unlocking, completely unlocking the shackles and exploding the limits of the human body. However, no one can answer how many genetic locks exist. Perhaps the end is the eternal life that all scientists dream of. Jiang Pingji frowned slightly. You Abba, I'm going off topic? The awakening I mentioned is essentially similar to genetic unlocking, but it's also different. The latter is to develop the potential of the human body, while the former is to trace back to the source and return to the ancestral inheritance. Why do you think the direct descendants of the Jiang family were attacked by the forces of the heavenly brain? Because the direct descendants of the Jiang family have an ancient bloodline. You are the last direct descendant, and at the same time, the only one who has the chance to awaken the ancestral power. This power is what the defector heavenly brain fears the most. Only you can completely kill it. What? I can't awaken? You Abba, die. The Federation will be buried with you. Don't worry, I'll mail you the best coffin. Heartless woman. Jiang Pingji curled her lips. No, this body belongs to Lu Shi. How can I awaken? You Abba. The ancient bloodline of the Jiang family is rather special. It doesn't attach to the body, but to the soul. Jiang Pingji lowered her eyes as if remembering something. The awakening thing can change hair color? Chapter 1534. Changing gender? So vicious? Jiang Pingji said that, but her eyes lit up. She was eager to try. You Abba, what do you want to do? Based on her understanding of Jiang Pingji, it was probably not a good thing. She had no integrity at all. Jiang Pingji said, well, we are all adults. Let's not beat around the bush. I want to cry Zixiao. Your Abba, you should really let your little girls see what kind of animal you are. What kind of tricks are you thinking about? Jiang Pingji muttered, just tell me if it's possible. You Abba, no, give up. The Jiang family's atavistic ability is fire control. It doesn't support gender change. Fire control? Jiang Pingji couldn't help but complain. Isn't this the same ability derived from unlocking my genes? She thought it would be some amazing special ability. In the end, it was just playing with fire. You Abba, it's different. Before the awakening, it was normal fire. After the awakening, the fire can burn everything. It's said to be the fire of extreme yang that can cleanse everything. Even the Federation's warships with the strongest defense can't withstand the damage of that kind of fire. Not only can it burn physical bodies, but it can also burn spiritual energy and life. Awakening the ancient bloodline ability, apart from the change of the fire, will also strengthen the body by 100 times. At the same time, it will greatly increase one's lifespan. Sky Brain hated the direct descendants of the Jiang family. Besides the old grudge from 2,000 years ago, there was another reason. Jiang Pingji echoed, it's really good. I won't need flint to start a fire in the future. You Abba. To be honest, if your ancestors heard what you said, they would most likely die with grievances. Including Jiang Pingji, there were only 3 awakened in 2,000 years. The first 2 were famous people who killed so many enemies of the Federation that they were terrified. But Jiang Pingji used them to start a fire? Be a little more promising, okay? Jiang Pingji couldn't help but roll her eyes. What was the use of her ability no matter how amazing it was? The enemy was a group of ordinary people. In order not to bully them, she restrained her spiritual domain. What else could she do? Jiang Pingji couldn't help but complain. If I don't use it to start a fire, what else can I do? Didn't the old chief just say that the fire after awakening can burn spiritual energy? In the words of this era, the human spirit is the so-called 3 souls and 7 spirits. This fire of mine is enough to extinguish a person's soul. It's just a war, there's no need to be so ruthless. All in all, this is a useless cheat. For the current her, it was indeed useless. Your Abba. His words were reasonable, and no one could refute him. Jiang Pingji's current state was like a main account with a full set of godly equipment going to the beginner's village. She could still defeat all the other players in the village without her godly equipment. To put it bluntly, it was meaningless to give her a set of godly equipment at that moment. The old commander felt that he should redeem himself. Your Abba, don't underestimate it. It will be very useful in the future. The old chief went offline, leaving Jiang Pingji with a lot of questions. Jiang Pingji looked at the chaotic battle and took a deep breath. She told herself again and again that this was a battle between ordinary people. She had to restrain herself. Although Jiang Pingji had been talking to the old chief for a few minutes, she did not stop killing the enemies. No matter if it was an enemy or a comrade, no one would have thought that Jiang Pingji could still be distracted by talking to someone while she was on a killing spree. If they knew, they would be so depressed that they would vomit blood. Of course, Fan Qin and the others were depressed enough. No matter how they ambushed or how they deployed their troops to attack, The enemy seemed to have predicted their actions in advance. Their defense was impenetrable. Even if they outnumbered the enemy by a lot, they did not have much of an advantage. At that moment, news came from the front line. Military advisor, the enemy has a valiant general. His combat power is really terrifying. The soldiers can't stop him at all. This statement was embellished. In fact, the soldiers in that area were scared out of their wits. Almost no one dared to advance and attack. If they did not take any measures, the enemy might use that area as a breakthrough and counterattack. Fan Chen asked, terrifying? How terrifying can he be? 100 people can't do anything to him. Fan Chen frowned slightly. It seemed that he did not expect Jiang Pingji to have such an inhuman existence. To describe someone's bravery, people always like to use, one man can hold the pass against 10,000, or one man can fight against 100. Whether it was 10,000, or one man can fight against 100, the words 10,000 and 100 were empty words. The general idea was that there were many people, not really 10,000 or 100. Even if it was a highly skilled general, when faced with hundreds of enemies, he would most likely lose his life. No matter how skilled he was, he had 2 hands and 2 feet. There was a limit to his physical strength. It was impossible for him to not be tired or injured. If Jiang Pingji really had such a general under her command, she should have some reputation. Unless a light flashed in Fan Chen's mind. He suddenly thought of something. He just speculated that Jiang Pingji was very likely to be at the front of the battle. At that moment, a young general with unparalleled bravery appeared. Could it be, how is Lu Shi's combat power? He asked the deputy general beside him. This deputy general was someone who had seen Jiang Pingji fight generals at the front of the battle. The deputy general answered honestly, this person is a brave general that is rare in the world. If I were to fight him, I wouldn't last more than half a cup of tea. Jiang Pingji had fought generals at the front of the battle and killed several people in a row. Those generals were all ranked highly in the Nye camp. Why are you suddenly asking about this, military counselor? Fan Chen said, take a guess. Is it possible that the young general who reported to us just now is Lu Shi? The deputy general was shocked by Fan Chen's speculation. Is this possible? He expressed that he did not understand the way the vassal's brain worked. It was fine to fight generals. If one's martial strength was high, there was a high chance of survival in a one-on-one fight. However, it was a chaotic battle now. The soldiers of the 2 armies could only rely on the color of the cloth tied around their armors, necks, or arms to distinguish between the enemy and their allies. As a vassal, it was fine that she did not stay at the rear and came to launch a sneak attack. Now she even dared to intervene in a chaotic battle. He admired her for being a man. Fan Chen said coldly, there is a 70% to 80% chance that it is accurate. Even if it was not accurate, Fan Chen wanted this young general to die here. Jiang Pingji had such a capable general under her command. It would greatly boost the morale of the 2 armies when they fought. It would be a disaster to keep him alive. Fan Chen's speculation was naturally correct. The person who was unrestrained and killed 300 enemy troops in a short time of half a stick of incense was Jiang Pingji. But I feel like my identity has been exposed. After a while, Jiang Pingji clearly felt that the enemy was deliberately targeting her. Chapter 1535. The enemy underestimated the power of the iron whip. When they aimed their long spears at White, which was under Jiang Pingji's crotch, Jiang Pingji waved her long whip and tied up all their spears like a snake. She exerted strength in her wrists and easily snatched the spears from the hands of more than a dozen people. She flicked her whip again and returned the spears to the enemy. Some pierced through the cheeks, some aimed at the neck, and some pierced through the heart. They couldn't even touch Whitey, let alone hurt Jiang Pingji. That was a pain in the ass. Fan Chen was extremely dissatisfied with the progress. So many people couldn't take down one person? His warhorse is still full of vigor and vitality? The general said, it's not that we are incompetent, it's because the enemy is too evil. Not to mention Jiang Pingji, The horse she was riding was evil. No matter how many people tried to stab the horse with their spears, they always hit an invisible but real barrier and couldn't move an inch. The soldiers were confused by the change. While they were in a daze, the general on the horse used his iron whip to sweep away the spears or directly hit the heads of the soldiers who surrounded him. It was not an exaggeration. The strength of the iron whip could really break the neck and send the head flying. The deputy general didn't even know how to describe how bloody and violent the scene was. Fan Chen said, "It's really Lu Shi. No matter what price we have to pay, we can't let this person live." The general sighed secretly and cupped his hands in acknowledgement. In order to arouse the fighting spirit of his soldiers, he directly called out Jiang Pingji's identity. As the saying goes, brave men are bound to be rewarded with a great reward. Under Fan Chen's instruction, the general showed the reward. This person is Lu Shi, the feudal lord. Whoever can take his head will be rewarded with 100,000 taels of gold and a title of nobility. 100,000 taels of gold? A title of nobility? The high reward made the eyes of the timid soldiers red. One by one, they rushed forward without a care for their lives. They were soldiers who hung their heads on their waistbands. There was no tomorrow, and they didn't know when they would be able to stand out. Now that there was an opportunity in front of them, they had to fight for it even if it meant risking their lives. Maybe they could steal Jiang Pingji's head. Now that he had obtained the head, he would be rewarded with 100,000 gold coins and a noble title. He would only need to enjoy it for the rest of his life. When Jiang Pingji's identity was exposed, Bai Ning and the other two hurriedly sent soldiers to escort Jiang Pingji to retreat, but their lord refused. "A bunch of trash wants my head?" Jiang Pingji felt humiliated. Not to mention a group of ordinary soldiers, even her colleagues from her previous life did not have the confidence to take her head. Did they really think that her head was made of paper and that anyone could covet it? "You're courting death." Jiang Pingji alone attracted half of the enemy's firepower. The enemy archers aimed at her and White, who was under her crotch. Fan Chen felt that Jiang Pingji deserved to die, but he did not know that Jiang Pingji was a ghost. Even the king of hell did not dare to take her life. The rain of arrows came from all directions. Those that could be shot down would be shot down, and those that couldn't be shot down would be blocked by the spiritual domain. She did not have to worry even if the enemy rushed over. Sending someone's head from 1,000 miles away, the gift was light, but the sentiment was heavy. How could she not accept it? Bai Ning, who was seriously injured, was ordered by Jiang Pingji to command and dispatch. He could not easily go forward. He could only listen to the soldiers' battle reports. Through a few words, he knew what shocking feat his lord had done. The enemy's corpses around her could pile up into a small hill. Qin Gong's injuries were relatively light, so he could lead the troops to support Jiang Pingji. "I have to inform the military counselors about this when I get back." He was not a person who liked to snitch, but he really could not stand his lord running around with the enemy. If Qiguan Rang and the others were there, Jiang Pingji would not dare to be so brazen. They were not there, and Qin Gong and Bai Ning could not suppress her. Even if his lord bore a grudge, Qin Gong still had to snitch. The night was dark. The two armies were fighting to the death. Almost everyone had lost their minds. A soldier had just stabbed an enemy to death, but in the next second, the enemy's blade pierced him full of holes. While the battle here was in a stalemate, the killing at Zhangjiang Pass was even more tragic. Wei Yong had obviously come prepared this time. Even though Wei Ci and the others had already thought of ways to destroy more than 50 of their catapults, there were still brand new catapults pushed up by the soldiers to replace those that had been smashed to pieces. The firepower was fierce, and the attack did not decrease. It was very dangerous on the city wall. Qiguan Rang and the others could only retreat to command, so as to avoid being accidentally injured by the catapults. "My lord is very right about one thing. The Nie family is rich and powerful. We are really inferior to them." Qiguan Rang's newly made feather fan had long been burnt to a crisp. His sleeves were also burned with a few holes. He looked very pathetic. Wei Ci smiled bitterly when he heard that. The Nie family was indeed rich and powerful. Old Master Sun Wen said with a gloomy expression, They are determined to break through Zhanjiang Pass. If this situation continues, I'm afraid we won't be able to defend it. It was not that our army was not strong enough. It was just that the enemy's numbers and firepower exceeded the limits of what we could withstand. In this siege, the losses of both sides were more tragic than the previous one. If it was in the past, Wei Yong would have long retreated in the face of such a huge loss. But this time, it was as if he had taken the wrong medicine and was unforgiving. Qiguanrang said, Wei Yong doesn't feel bad about such a huge loss. Wei Ci said, according to his character, he won't easily withdraw his troops at this time. Of course, it's best not to withdraw either. Qiguanrang asked Wei Ci with his eyes. Wei Ci said, my lord is still outside Zhanjiang Pass. If eldest brother knows, he will definitely send troops back to help. My lord will be in danger. If Zhanjiang Pass was lost, it was lost. They could fight back sooner or later. But if my lord was gone, then it was really irreversible. Qiguanrang sighed secretly. His lord was such a worrisome person. At this time, old Master Sun Wen said, if we can't defend it, we might as well retreat to Erdeo City. Wei Ci asked, Zidao means, to let go of Zhanjiang Pass? If my lord finds out, she will definitely be furious. Sun Wen said, this is called advancing by retreating. Jiang Pingji knew that the Nie family was difficult to deal with, so she was unusually cautious when defending. Not only did they build a barbican, but they also built a temporary city wall to cushion the enemy's troops. Sun Wen said, the area outside the city wall of Zhanjiang Pass is controlled by the enemy. It's also quite convenient for them to transport catapults and scaling ladders without any obstruction, but it's a burden for our army. It's better to let go of this city wall and retreat to Erdeo City. The distance between Guanmen Pass and Erdeo City is quite far. If the enemy wants to attack Erdeo City, they can only go through the city gate. Although the city gate is tall and wide, there are tens of thousands of enemies. It's impossible for all of them to rush in at once. It'll take even more time to transport ladders, catapults, and other supplies in. The newly built Erdeo City's defensive ability was slightly weaker, but it could still cushion the enemy's troops and buy time for their own side. If the enemy wanted to rush in, they would definitely disrupt the army's formation. It might even lead to the predicament of the reinforcements not being able to arrive in time. Because of the city gate, the enemy's catapults could not reach Erdeo City in time, imperceptibly weakening the enemy's combat power. Sometimes, a strategic retreat was also to lure the enemy into taking the bait. Chapter 1536. Wei Ci looked hesitant. Even if he knew that old Master Sun Wen's plan was feasible, there were too many variables. Since ancient times, how many fake retreats had become real collapses because of unforeseen events? Soldiers did not know the plans of their superiors. They only knew that if they were defeated by the enemy and fled, it would definitely affect the overall morale. Morale was something that could not be seen or touched, but it was too useful on the battlefield. With high morale, even rookies could chase elites around. With low morale, even the best elites could not defeat the enemy's grassroots. Wei Ci was not against old Master Sun Wen's plan. He just wanted to minimize the negative impact of a retreat. Seeing this, Qiguanrang chose a compromise. Let me command here to resist for a while. The two of you go to Erdeo City to prepare for the enemy, Qiguanrang said decisively. If we retreat at the last minute, the soldiers will think that we are no match for the Nie army. If we make arrangements in advance, the impact of the retreat should be minimized. Of course, Wei Ci could not agree to leave Qiguanrang alone to command. Even with the help of several generals, he could not take care of the entire battle situation alone. At this moment, they were already stretched thin. If Wei Ci and Sun Wen left, Qiguanrang would be under considerable pressure. Qiguanrang shook his head and said, "There's no time to lose. Go and prepare as soon as possible. Looking at the situation, the city gate can still hold for a quarter of an hour." Wei Ci and old Master Sun Wen looked at each other and did not continue to object. This was not the time to waste time. Any delay would cost countless lives. Someone, Qiguan Rang's eyes darkened. He summoned the soldiers and said, "Immediately send people to pile the extra stones at the entrance of the city gate." The enemy's attack was fierce. Even though the soldiers on the city gate had tried their best to kill the enemy soldiers carrying the siege logs, there would be another batch after they were killed. The enemy tried their best to cover them. When dozens of people carried the siege logs and hit the city gate, Qiguan Rang could feel the ground tremble slightly under his feet. Even though the main materials of the city gate were thick solid wood, bronze, and fine iron, it could not withstand such violent ravages. Since the city gate would be breached sooner or later, it was better to seize the time to block the enemy. Military counselor, if the city gate is blocked. The general looked hesitant. He was one of the people who knew that his lord had led troops to attack the enemy at night. If the entrance was blocked, not only would it hinder the enemy, but it would also hinder the return of his lord. Qiguan Rang said coldly, "You only need to obey military orders and not question them in front of the battlefield. I know what to do in an emergency." The general cupped his fists and said, "Yes, sir." After saying that, he immediately ordered his men to use a portion of the stones to block the entrance of the city. The entrance to the city was blocked. Even if the enemy continued to use their siege weapons to break open the city gate, it would not be easy for them to charge into Zhangjiang Pass. Calculating, they should be able to delay for a while. Why are the two military counselors back? Could it be Feng Yi was arranging for the soldiers to send the city defense equipment to the front line? Out of the corner of her eye, she caught a glimpse of Wei Ci and the other man rushing over. Her heart thumped. Wei Ci raised his hand to stop Feng Yi from speaking. He said briefly, "The frontline city gate has not fallen." Feng Yi's eyes were filled with worry. Even though they were so far away, he could still hear what was happening in Yidao City. He was constantly on tenterhooks, but there was a limit to what he could do. He could only try his best to do what he could. While busy, he enriched himself and gained experience. Sun Wen asked, "Where's Lan Lan?" Feng Yi said, "There are too many wounded soldiers sent over from the front line. To prevent chaos, Sun Lan is helping to direct the transfer of the wounded soldiers to the casualty barracks." When the two armies fought, the number of soldiers who died on the spot was not high. Most of the soldiers died because they were not treated in time. Jiang Pengji was clear about this. Naturally, she had to take measures to reduce the death rate. For this purpose, she even specially set up a combat medical battalion. The soldiers of this battalion had to learn a certain amount of first aid knowledge. They also had to learn combat skills from ordinary soldiers. Their duty was to specifically transfer the wounded soldiers who had lost their combat ability but were not yet dead. Their medical knowledge did not have to be better than the military doctors in the casualty barracks, but they had to know how to minimize the secondary damage of the wounded soldiers when transferring them. Their combat skills did not have to be better than the combat troops, but they had to learn how to protect themselves. The soldiers of this battalion were basically between the logistical medical unit and the frontline combat troops. Although they were not as good as the top, they were not weaker than the bottom. In a sense, they were more important. The number of wounded soldiers at the front line increased. The transfer was disorderly. Sun Lan took the initiative to ask for help. When Sun Wen heard this, he felt gratified and a little melancholy at the same time. He was also a person who had experienced great storms. Naturally, he knew what kind of place the logistical medical unit was. It looked like it was at the rear, but the scene was no less than hell on earth. In the past, Sun Lan had not even seen a chicken being slaughtered. He did not know if he could bear to see it all of a sudden. Old Master Sun Wen valued his grandson too much, so he subconsciously treated Sun Lan as a child. He did not know that his grandson had already grown up. War was the best way to train people. At first, Sun Lan helped to command and dispatch. Later, when he saw that there were not enough people, he also helped to carry stretchers and wounded soldiers. He went back and forth dozens, hundreds of times. The clothes on his shoulders were torn by the hemp ropes. The flesh on his shoulders and palms were rubbed until there were bloody blisters. His originally clean clothes were also dyed red by the blood of the wounded soldiers. From afar, he looked like a bloody man. There was more determination between his brows. How could one still see his past appearance? He happened to hear the news that the front line was about to retreat. He suddenly felt as if he was struck by lightning. It was as if his soul was about to leave his body. Grandfather's son Wen was at the front line. How was he now? Grandfather, Sun Lan looked at the blazing flames on the horizon. His heart almost twisted into a ball. However, he had no time to inquire about his grandfather's news. He could only grit his teeth and suppress all his worries. The huge medical unit was full of wounded soldiers. Some were lucky enough to get stretchers or straw mats. Most of the soldiers could only lie on the ground. Those with less serious injuries leaned against each other to reduce the space they occupied. Because the female military doctors were short of manpower, the medical supplies were also somewhat stretched. Many soldiers only had time to hastily clean their wounds, stitch them up, and bandage them. The rest was up to fate. The seemingly crude medical methods were very comprehensive in this era. Overall, the death rate of the soldiers under Jiang Pingji's command was also the lowest in the same period. Listening to the cries of the wounded soldiers, Sun Lan took a deep breath. He suddenly had an unprecedented impulse. However, he quickly shook the thought out of his mind. Chapter 1537. There were many people in the Nye clan. The old master had given birth to 5 sons in one go, and the 5 sons had many children. By the time Nye Qing's father's generation had married and had children, the number of relatives Nye Qing had could be measured in hundreds, and he had more cousins than he could remember. Fortunately, Nye Qing did not have face blindness and had a good memory. Otherwise, he wouldn't have remembered. This year, at the clan gathering, Nye Qing followed behind his father, Nye Yang. His watery eyes couldn't help but look around. Nye Yang knew his son couldn't sit still. He smiled. If it's boring, let the servant girls take you to the side to play with your brothers and sisters. Nye Qing blushed and lowered his head, not daring to look at his father's teasing expression. At that time, Nye Yang had yet to shine. He was like a luminous pearl, bright but not eye-catching. He didn't have a strong presence. This caused Nye Qing's status to be neither high nor low. Even so, the servant girls in the clan didn't dare to slight him and carefully served him. Nye Qing rested for a while in the side room. From the corner of his eyes, he saw a few children of the clan surrounding someone in the garden. What are you doing? Nye Qing was far away and couldn't hear what they were saying. But he could see the children shrunk their shoulders, their faces full of grievance. The group of young Langjuns saw Nye Qing come over and immediately showed displeased expressions. I'm just having a chat with my brothers. The one who said this was the tallest Langjun. Nye Qing recognized him. He was the eldest grandson of the Nye family's first branch. So it's like this. I misunderstood. Please forgive me, cousin. As Nye Qing finished, he beckoned to the boy of the same age who was surrounded. Come here, the elders are looking for you. The servant girls looked for you for a long time and thought you were lost. Come with me. The moment he said this, the eldest grandson's face darkened. But Nye Qing's expression was natural and he couldn't question him. He could only watch as Nye Qing took Nye Yang away. Were they bullying you just now? He had a good memory and faintly remembered that this harmless rabbit-like Langjun was his uncle's child. Nye Yang pinched his fingers and nodded. His eyes were still red, making him look even more like a rabbit. Why did they bully you? Cousin's words don't make sense. I was bullied by those tall ones. Shouldn't you be asking me why? Why are you asking me instead? Nye Yang pouted in dissatisfaction. Realizing that he had gone too far, he awkwardly corrected himself. This little brother didn't mean to talk back. It's just that things haven't been going well recently, and they're very annoyed. This little brother. I hope cousin brother can forgive me. Nye Qing had a good temper, and he could also see that Nye Yang's situation was not very good, so naturally he would not vent his anger on him. The reason why I'm asking you is because you're the only one beside me. If they're here, I'll go ask them. Nye Yang's face turned red in embarrassment. He felt apologetic for his antisocial behavior. It's nothing much. When I was in the family school, They were criticized by the teacher for their homework. Little brother came in late, but he did better than them, so they were jealous. Nie Yang sighed and said in an old-fashioned tone, "Those who don't attract jealousy are mediocre. I won't argue with them." Nie Qing laughed heartily. It was his first time seeing such an interesting cousin. Those who don't attract jealousy are mediocre. These words really make sense. Nie Yang continued, "Other than this, it probably has something to do with my looks. They always say that I look too much like a girl and am easy to bully." Even if he was a child from a landowning household, he was still a child. When it came to bullying others, any reason could be a reason. Nie Yang's father liked women, and he had children one after another. Although Nie Yang was the son of the first wife, he was not valued. For a child who was not valued even by his own father, how much support could he have in the complicated environment of the family school? As long as it wasn't a big deal, the headmaster wouldn't care if it was a small fight. Nie Qing laughed. "I see that you have a sharp tongue. You don't look like someone easy to bully." Nie Yang's eyes widened. He looked even more innocent and easy to bully. Nie Qing said, "I'll find a chance to talk to the family school's teacher. The family school is a place to study and not a place for a bunch of landowning households to bully the weak and fight. As for you, if you're wronged, you can tell me. I'll support you." Nie Yang did not expect that he could find a backer. But why? This was the first time he and Nie Qing had met. He was not used to the other party being so intimate right from the start. One who was unaccountably solicitous was hiding evil intentions. Later, it was proven that Nie Qing's temperament was like this. It was a proper central air conditioner, but this one took special care of Nie Yang. "Thank you, big brother." Nie Yang was only half a year younger than Nie Qing, but the two of them were half a head apart. Nie Qing thought to himself, could it be that his uncle had deducted Nie Yang's rations, causing this younger cousin to be so skinny and small? No wonder he was bullied by others. Perhaps it was fate. Although the two of them were not blood-related brothers, they got along well. Not long after, they were like one person. Nie Yang's good days did not last long. He was secretly pushed into the pond and choked a few times. That night, he caught a cold. When Nie Qing heard the news, he rushed over to see him. Nie Yang was so sick that his entire face was red. "Big brother," Nie Qing said, "what is it?" Nie Yang stammered, "Last night when I fell into the water, I definitely did not slip in accidentally. Someone pushed me from behind." Nie Qing said, "Big brother knows. I will definitely support you." Nie Yang was sick, and the more he thought about it, the more afraid he became. He was not a good swimmer, and the pond was quite deep, not even above his head. Last night, he really thought that he was going to drown. Why did these people bully him? Nie Yang's eyes showed some confusion, but then they became determined. Because he had no power or influence, his father did not love him, and his mother did not love him, he did not have the ability to protect himself, so they bullied him. Although Nie Qing treated him well, he could not prevent him from being pushed into the pond and almost drowning. To put it bluntly, he still had to rely on himself to climb up until no one dared to bully him anymore. As he thought of this, a strange light laugh suddenly rang in his mind. "You are an interesting person. You have a high level of comprehension." Nie Yang's body trembled, his face pale. He was so scared that his limbs turned cold. Even the thick bedding could not give him a sense of security. "For you, I am the system. You don't have to ask directly. Just ask in your heart." "I can hear you," the system said. "Just now, you said that you want to rely on your own ability to climb up until no one dares to bully you, right? This goal is a little difficult to achieve." Nie Yang said, "It has nothing to do with you. You demon, you are still pretending to be mysterious." "I do not need to pretend to be mysterious because I am a demon in the eyes of you mortals." The system laughed. "Your personality is very much in line with my criteria for choosing a host. Young man, if you only rely on yourself, you will have to suffer a lot in the future. Why don't you become my host? My power will be yours to use. To tell you the truth, I am the Emperor Growth System. My hosts are all people with Emperor's Qi and have the potential to rule the world. Within the borders of Zhongzhou, your Emperor's Qi is the thickest. It can be seen that the heavens intend for you to stand out in this chaotic world. Nonsense. The world is at peace now. How can there be chaos? If the host does not believe me, just wait and see. Chapter 1538. Although they were prepared to retreat from Secondary Path City, they were not retreating mindlessly. Qiguan Rang knew this very well. They had to plan it slowly and act slowly. They had to let the enemy not notice and let their own soldiers know that retreat was not a route but a strategic arrangement. Because they were cautious enough, the Nia army did not suspect anything. What's the situation at the front? Wei Yong was always paying attention to the battle. Seeing the tragic situation, even he could not help but frown, leaving a mark between his brows. He had thought that attacking Zhanjiang Pass tonight would give them an advantage and convenience, but he did not expect the enemy to be so stubborn. If the two armies continued to be in a stalemate, the losses on both sides would multiply. The enemy is already showing signs of defeat. They will most likely not be able to hold on. The general's serious face finally showed some joy, and his tone became lighter. The resistance now is not as strong as at the beginning, and their morale is getting lower. They will be defeated sooner or later. Wei Yong pinched his brows, and his tightly pursed lips almost became a straight line. Those who were not familiar with him knew that he was in a bad mood. The general asked him fearfully, "Military advisor, is there anything wrong?" Wei Yong said coldly, "Our army had the advantage of a sneak attack, and it took a long time for the enemy to show signs of defeat. What is there to be happy about?" After hearing this, the general was embarrassed. However, he was dark, and the night was dark, so others could not see it. "I was wrong." Wei Yong changed the topic. "Lu Shi is our strong enemy, so it is expected that he has such strength." How to show his strength? Naturally, it was to be stronger than a strong enemy. If Zhanjiang Pass was as weak as paper, the late Lord Nyelyang would not have died in peace. The Nye army at the foot of the city persevered in setting up ladders on the city wall. The catapult constantly used burning fireballs to attack the enemy behind the wall, and at the same time, provided cover for the soldiers climbing the ladders. At the same time, the soldiers at the city gate also carried heavy battering rams against the city gate. Their cheeks were red, and they gritted their teeth. The veins on their foreheads were bulging, and their clothes were drenched in sweat. They shouted a battle cry and exerted force at the same time. Even though Zhanjiang Pass's gate was sturdy, it was now cracked. Seeing the crack, everyone was greatly encouraged, as if victory was right in front of them. They worked even harder. When the sound of the crack on the city gate expanding reached his ears, it was like the sound of nature. With a loud bang, the city gate was completely blasted open. Through the crack, everyone could see the rocks blocking the entrance of the city, and they were almost dumbfounded. It would take time to clear the rocks, and the number of soldiers climbing the ladders was limited, so they could not pose much of a threat. Qiguan Rang gave the order to retreat to Erdeo City. With the obstruction of the city walls and the holes in the city, there were not many pursuers. Naturally, there were not many casualties. The general of the Nye army passed on the news to Wei Yong. Wei Yong's expression did not change, as if he had already expected this. "It doesn't matter. Let's clear the rocks and rest for a while before chasing after them." The general was dissatisfied. "Our army's morale is at its peak. At this time, we should completely defeat the enemy in one go." Wei Yong said coldly, "The city's tunnels have been completely sealed off by the enemy. May I ask how the general is going to dispatch a large number of elites and supplies to kill the enemy in such a short time?" He was afraid that he would be killed by the enemy as soon as he caught up. Sharpening the knife will not delay the work of cutting firewood. Don't tell me that general doesn't even understand this common sense? For them to be able to pry open the gates of Zhanjiang Pass, didn't they rely on the support of military supplies and their advantage in numbers? In terms of the quality of their soldiers, they did not have an advantage. Using one's weakness to attack the enemy's strength, water must have gotten into their brains. But the general did not agree with Wei Yong's opinion. When Nyelyang was still alive, he had not liked Wei Yong very much. He admitted that Wei Yong was outstanding. If he did not have any ability, Liang would not have thought so highly of him. However, there was a good saying, man proposes, but God disposes. So what if this group of strategists had the ability to scheme and scheme? There was a large discrepancy between actual operations and theoretical assumptions. Marching and fighting a war could not be done by relying on armchair strategies. They had to take into account the changes on the battlefield and make targeted adjustments at the right time. Wei Yong was afraid of the slightest thing in battle. He felt angry just looking at him. Now, he had even pushed away a great opportunity. What did he want? Thinking of this, the general felt even more depressed. Wei Yong was a strategist. It was enough that he was responsible for planning, but he was interfering with the general's work. Many of Liang's old officials felt that Wei Yong wanted to monopolize power and make the new Lord Qing a figurehead. The general did not think so at first, but seeing Wei Yong's current actions, he could not help but waver. He said, "The enemy has been routed and the army's morale is in chaos. This general thinks that we should follow up our victory and pursue them, not giving them any chance to breathe. The strategist thinks too much. Instead, he attends to one thing and loses sight of another, delaying the opportunity." When it comes to marching and fighting a war, this general boasts that he is not much worse than the strategist. Wei Yong could not help but sneer. He said, "General, do you think that the elites under Liu Shi's command will be routed so easily?" Liang had led the troops to feign an attack on Zhanjiang Pass. Although not all the elites had been dispatched, it had been a difficult battle. The previous lord had always taken the enemy seriously. After this battle, he was even more alert. That was a true elite force, not a grassroots team. They would not collapse after a single defeat. This person in front of him was too inexperienced. Did he really think that Jiang Pingji was an enemy that he had fought before? The general said angrily, "Strategist, don't diminish your own prestige and boost the morale of others." Wei Yong's eyes turned cold. He said coldly, "Does the general want to disobey military orders?" The general was also loyal to the Nye family, but he had his own thoughts. He disapproved of Wei Yong's actions. He said, "Strategist, don't forget that in terms of responsibilities, you are in charge of the civil and I am in charge of the military. Although the strategist can intervene in the matter of deploying troops, it is not something that you can decide on your own." As a strategist, Wei Yong had a certain amount of military power, but when it came to truly haggling, he was still a civilian and could not suppress the other. If Fan Qin or the young master Nye Qing were here, he naturally would not be afraid. If he was alone, it would be somewhat troublesome. If the general insists on doing so, I have nothing to say. I only have one thing to say. If we lead the troops to pursue and cause the battle to fail, will the general be willing to take responsibility? The general snorted and said heroically, "I will be punished according to military law. I will not have any resentment." With that, he flipped over and mounted his horse. Wei Yong looked at him with a headache. He could not deny the general's loyalty to the Nye family, but the two of them had different opinions. It was inevitable that the conflict would increase. Seeing this, the generals on Wei Yong's side were extremely worried. "Strategist, what should we do now? We can't really ask the general to walk into the enemy's trap, right?" The military strategist's talent was repeatedly affirmed by the previous Lord Liang. The enemy was also so cunning. It was definitely not wrong to be more cautious. Wei Yong said coldly, "It doesn't matter. Anyway, we won't lose many people. Let him suffer." Chapter 1539. The deputy general could not bear it, but there was nothing he could do. Wei Yong said, "If we don't make him give up, there will be more conflicts in the future. It's better to take the opportunity to break his spirit and make him more clear-headed." "But if that's the case, our army will definitely suffer losses," Wei Yong said coldly. "Do you think losing hundreds or thousands of people this time will teach him a lesson, or losing tens of thousands of the entire army next time?" The deputy general understood these principles, but Wei Yong's decisive and calm approach still made him feel uncomfortable. Sigh, if only the late Lord Liang was still here, this kind of thing would not have happened. Although everyone had conflicts, they did not dare to bring their personal grievances to the surface. Now that the situation was like this, they wondered if the late lord would be angry if he knew. Most likely he would. When the late lord was still here, when was the military advisor Wei Yong ever questioned like this and even used his power to oppress others? The deputy general said, "What if the general still stubbornly refuses to repent and instead holds a grudge against the military advisor?" Wei Yong said, "Although that person is bossy and willful, he is not an unreasonable person. Give him a lesson and he will listen to you." Some people were just stubborn. If they did not throw the truth in the other party's face, they would stubbornly walk a dark path to the end. Reality proved that some people needed to be taught a lesson. They would only know that they were wrong when they were slapped in the face. Although Qiguan Rang and the others had retreated, there were no signs of defeat. Their retreat was also orderly. Whether it was advancing or retreating, they were at ease. The general sent troops to chase after them. They ate as many as they sent. They killed thousands of enemies one after another, and the army's morale was greatly boosted. "TSK, I heard Zixiao say that Wei Yong was a very cautious person and would not easily take the bait. Why is he so reckless now?" Qiguan Rang knew that Wei Yong would not immediately send troops to chase after them, so he was very relaxed when he retreated. He never expected that he would miscalculate. If not for the fact that the city entrance was still blocked, the enemy could only climb the ladder to the city wall. How could there be so few enemies chasing after them? Wei Yong underestimated us. He dared to chase after us with so few pursuers. Did he really think that our army would be defeated so badly after retreating? If the army completely lost the will to fight, thousands of pursuers could indeed kill them. For example, his lord had fought in front of the battlefield and became famous in one battle. The arrival of the miracle had shocked the enemy and destroyed their remaining fighting spirit. This kind of enemy was either so stupid that they didn't even dare to run, or they only cared about running and didn't know how to resist. Thieves were easy to kill. However, when Qiguan Rang examined himself, he did not think that he met the above criteria. "Counselor, maybe he's just being careless." The young general who was guarding Qiguan Rang interrupted with a smile. Qiguan Rang frowned slightly. "It's not to the extent of being careless. Do you think our military counselor Wei Zixiao will get carried away and become careless? As the saying goes, birds of a feather flock together. Wei Ci valued his eldest brother Wei Qiu so much. The latter must have something special about him and would not make mistakes easily, let alone such a low-level mistake." Qiguan Rang was more inclined to the other theory than being careless. Their old lord, Nie Liang, has passed away, and the new lord, Nie Qing, has returned to Zhongzhou. Without a leader at the front line, I'm afraid, the young general asked curiously. "Afraid of what?" Qiguan Rang smiled and said, "I'm afraid that someone has a disagreement with Wei Qiu and is in conflict." The young general said, "I heard that Wei Qiu's position in the Nie army is not low and he has military power in his hands. Who can overpower him?" Qiguan Rang said, "Why not? Wei Qiu has military power, but he doesn't have a monopoly." The young general said proudly, "These things will not happen in the Lord's hands. The Lord has a strong temperament and acts fairly. It is indeed not easy to happen, but nothing is absolute." Qiguan Rang knew very well that it was not that there were no conflicts in his lord's camp, but that she did not bring them to the surface. If there were conflicts of interests and standpoints in the future, they would probably fight more fiercely than he imagined. If the Lord did not reveal everything to him, he was afraid that he would always be on guard against Wei Ci and only plan to get rid of him when necessary. So what if Wei Ci was the Lord's man? When it came to politics, this identity would only hasten Wei Ci's death. Qiguan Rang would not be merciful just because Wei Ci was the Lord's man. At most, he would let Wei Ci die with dignity and leave his corpse intact. The young general asked curiously, "Is there a conflict?" This general's eyesight is poor, so I did not notice that the generals and the military counselor are getting along very well. Qiguan Rang was speechless. How did the conflict disappear? The conflict between the gentry and the poor was a conflict that could not be ignored. There were not many gentry in the Lord's camp, but it was not that there were none. When the world was slightly more stable and there were many things waiting to be done, it was inevitable that the gentry would be put to good use. Who asked the gentry to have so many gentry? The foundation of the poor was still too shallow. In the beginning, they could still fight evenly with the gentry by relying on their achievements in founding the country. As time went on, the disadvantage of the poor with a shallow foundation became more obvious. They would either be assimilated by the gentry and become a new gentry, or they would fall and never have a chance to make a comeback. For the gentry to survive for so many years, their means of survival were not comparable to those of the poor. He was deep in thought. The young general smiled and said, "The Lord is so wise. Even if there is a conflict, she will nip it in the bud." Qiguan Rang could not help but laugh. His Lord was really deified. Yes, the Lord is the child of providence. There is nothing she can't do. Wei Si's brainwashing was really scary. A good seedling had been brainwashed into a brainless fanboy. General Nyejun caught up and found that the enemy had retreated calmly and did not look as pathetic as he had imagined. His face immediately burned. Not only was he ashamed, but he was also angry at being played by the enemy. "You brats, such despicable behavior is really infuriating." The general was a person who cared about his reputation. He had just dissed Wei Yong without thinking, and now he was slapped in the face by the enemy. When Wei Yong caught up with the soldiers, he did not dare to look at the other party's face. Fortunately, Wei Yong was magnanimous and did not deliberately use this to humiliate him. The two of them tacitly brushed this matter aside. Wei Yong said, "Retreat 1 kilometer with the troops first. We will attack when the supplies are ready." The general subconsciously wanted to refute, but he had learned his lesson and did not want to be slapped in the face again in such a short time. "We will listen to the military counselor's arrangements." Many soldiers did not understand Wei Yong's decision to retreat 2 kilometers. They had won a small battle. Why should they give up the fat meat in their mouths and choose to retreat? This was a classic case of information stagnation. The people below did not understand the orders of their superiors. Some would blindly follow, but there were also people who were confused and even misunderstood. Why are they retreating? Retreating to Erdeo City? They could not help but feel puzzled when they saw the enemy retreat. Qiguan Rang smiled and said, "Of course they have to retreat. Why don't we wait for our army to send out troops?" The enemy's supplies did not keep up. At this time, they had to retreat and stabilize the situation. If they continued to wait, they would capsize. Old Master Sun Wen's face was cold as he asked Qiguan Rang, "Is it possible now?" Chapter 1540. There was also a need to pay attention to the timing of the attack. If it was too early, it would not be enough, and if it was too late, it would be easy to lose the best opportunity. Qiguan Rang was experienced and could control the timing, not to mention that he had Wei Si and Old Man Sun Wen by his side. "Be vigilant, the enemy is most likely going to attack." Wei Yong's face was solemn. "Counselor, you said, they will attack now?" The general was shocked at first, but he quickly understood. He grasped the weapon in his hand tightly and said in a thunderous voice, "Counselor, don't worry. If they dare to attack, we will make sure that they do not return." Wei Yong said, "Of course they will attack. Otherwise, when our supplies are in place, they will not be able to defend themselves and their morale will collapse." A retreat could appease the soldiers and ensure that their morale would not be broken and their formation would not be disrupted. If there was another retreat, they would be in a passive position. Wei Yong had reason to believe that this was Qiguan Rang's last chance to attack. As expected, there was movement in Erdeo City. Several city gates opened and soldiers poured out like a tide. The cavalry and chariots were at the forefront. They were extremely fast and closed the distance between them in no time. It looked like they were about to charge. Wei Yong ordered the archers to face the enemy and set up the barricade posts to obstruct the enemy cavalry's attack as much as possible. Then he ordered the archers to attack with arrows. The cavalry had always been a headache for the feudal lords, not to mention that Jiang Pingji had both heavy and light cavalry. Both had their own strengths and were difficult to coordinate. The heavy cavalry collided and cut the formation while the light cavalry used their speed to outflank the enemy. It was an invincible combination. Although the barricade posts could cause some trouble for the cavalry, they were not fatal. Jiang Pingji's heavy cavalry used heavy horses. Both the men and horses were covered in heavy armor. The craftsmanship of the armor had been improved by her several times. There was almost no weakness on the armor. The joints were hidden and the armor was as thick as half a knuckle. Unless the enemy archers had superb archery skills and could aim at the eyes of the men or horses from a long distance, it was difficult to cause fatal damage to them. The armor was either bronze or refined iron. How could ordinary arrows break through such heavy defense? In Jiang Pingji's words, the heavy cavalry were a group of iron turtles. They had no other shortcomings except for their slow speed. When thousands of heavy cavalry charged together, they could even send the barricade posts flying. However, the heavy cavalry also had obvious weaknesses. Their durability was extremely poor, their endurance was worrying, and their speed was also slow. If he was entangled by the enemy, he would be like a lamb waiting to be slaughtered. On the other hand, light cavalry sacrificed their defense in exchange for speed. They came and went like the wind, and their mobility was the best-known troop type. Wei Yong had investigated Jiang Pingji, so he naturally knew about the trump card troops under her command. Seeing that even the light and heavy cavalry had come out, he knew that Qiguan Rang and the others intended to have a showdown with him. Therefore, he did not dare to act rashly. He was in charge of dispatching and commanding, but the battlefield was ever-changing. Many times, it still depended on the performance of the commander. Seeing that the heavy cavalry was armed to the teeth, General Nie immediately changed tactics. Chop the horse's legs and poke the horse's eyes. The general was experienced in dealing with cavalrymen. Cavalrymen were scary, but as long as they couldn't charge or move after entering the formation, they wouldn't be much of a threat. Lasso, remember to aim at the arms and heads of the enemy cavalrymen. The heavy cavalry on horseback was terrifying, but those who were dragged off horseback were not so great. Wearing such heavy armor to fight, just the armor alone would consume most of their strength. Once the heavy cavalry fell off their horses, they would lose their advantage in speed and strength, making it even easier for them to die. Of course, this was a theoretical tactic. There was always a huge gap between actual operation and theoretical knowledge. The enemy heavy cavalry did not fight alone, but in groups. The heavy cavalry, together with their horses, weighed about 800 to 1,000 kilograms, while the Asian elephants weighed only 3 to 5 tons. The heavy cavalry launched an attack at the same time, ignoring the enemy's defensive posts and charging into the enemy's formation against the rain of arrows. How could a few dozen soldiers stop them? They crossed the defensive posts and charged into the crowd. The unlucky guy who bore the brunt of the impact had his sternum broken, his head split open, and he could not be more dead. The Zanmadeo in the hands of the heavy cavalry was also specially made. The blade was wide, the handle was extremely long, and the blade was sharp. Chopping off a person's head was like cutting tofu. More than 1,000 heavy cavalry seemed to have barged into no man's land. They ignored the drizzle of obstacles along the way. The heavy cavalry's performance was so outstanding, the light cavalry was not willing to fall behind. The most annoying thing about cavalry, especially light cavalry, was that they would attack when they wanted to, but by the time you wanted to retaliate, they had already run far away. How could a two-legged person compare to a four-legged horse? Moreover, it was a fast-moving live target that was difficult to aim at. Archery was not so easy to practice. Those godly archers who could shoot with 100% accuracy could not be ordinary archers their entire lives. Most of the time, the role of an archer was to shoot arrows in the direction of the enemy and cause indiscriminate damage through a large area of arrow rain. If one arrow could not hit its target, then a few more would be shot. A blind cat could always find a dead mouse, and the arrows that were shot could also hit the enemy. Qiguan Rang sent the heavy cavalry to lead the attack, not to use them as cannon fodder to fight the enemy. They were the most valuable troops under the Lord's command. Men could eat, but horses could eat even more. Every qualified cavalry battalion soldier was built with money and rice. The main purpose of the cavalry going into battle was to use them to oppress the enemy in terms of momentum and force them into confusion. At the same time, it was to buy time for the follow-up troops, to make the enemy unable to stabilize their position and delay the main force until the main force rushed over. However, they did not only have cavalry. The Nie family was even wealthier than Jiangpingji. The scale of the cavalry that they trained was not small. Qiguan Rang saw that the enemy had stabilized their position and began to counterattack. He immediately ordered the cavalry to return to the formation to reduce losses as much as possible. The light cavalry stood guard and obstructed the enemy's pursuit. The heavy cavalry was responsible for covering the return of the formation. It would be heartbreaking to lose even a few of these gold ingots. Kill. Wei Yong saw the situation and his expression was extremely cold. At this point in the fierce battle, the sky slowly turned white. The two armies fought for a whole night, but both sides were in high spirits. As soon as the battle began, they were inseparable and fought to the death. The Nie army's morale was high because of a small victory. Jiang Pingji's troops were full of confidence. They killed until their eyes were red. At the same time, Jiang Pingji and the rest led the remaining troops to a draw with the troops led by Fan Chen. Fan Chen's troops were originally 2 times larger than theirs, but now they were tied by her. Jiang Pingji spat out a mouthful of blood and revealed a sinister smile. It was a really satisfying night of killing. In front of her were enemies and there were heads everywhere. Most importantly, no one could beat her in killing them. I haven't killed to my heart's content in a long time. Bai Ning was also old and seriously injured. After staying up all night, he showed signs of fatigue. Hearing his lord's words, he could not help but smile bitterly. If he counted the corpses on the battlefield, he was afraid that 1/3 of them had died in the hands of his lord. No one survived under the god-slaying sword. Those who were slashed by her would die. Every slash was aimed at the enemy's vital parts. Chapter 1541. Bai Ning lamented, "Isn't it a nightmare to fight an entire army alone?" In this battle, they suffered heavy losses at the beginning, but their subsequent losses were not significant. The enemy was the opposite of them. They had the upper hand in the early stages, but they were defeated by their own army in the middle and later stages. No matter how Fan Chen used violence to suppress the fluctuating morale of the army, the Nie army still collapsed. He had never expected that the person who had turned the situation around was actually his lord. She had relied on violent means to forcefully beat the arrogant enemy to the ground. Initially, the enemy outnumbered them, but the lord led the soldiers to cut down the numbers on both sides. There was actually such a thing in the world. Qin Gong muttered, "An ordinary person's arm would be crippled after wielding a sword for a whole night. On the other hand, my lord is still full of energy." Bai Ning echoed, "She's inhuman." At that moment, they even suspected that their lord was a deity who had descended to the mortal world to play with mortals like them. Little did they know that their lord, whom they praised to the heavens, was being lectured by the old chief, who had just returned to sleep. Jiang Pingji was extremely depressed. The old chief could go back to sleep happily, but she had been fighting and killing the enemy the whole night. Even if she didn't get any credit, she had worked hard. Couldn't the old leader be merciful and give her some face? "You Abba, there's really something wrong with your mentality. As the saying goes, a higher-ranking official can crush a person to death." The old chief was not only Jiang Pingji's former superior, but he had also guided and taught her. Even though she was very depressed, Jiang Pingji could only listen obediently on the surface. She yawned as she listened. "You Abba, do you really think you've completed the mission given by the Federation by killing the Skybrain? Can you just retire after accomplishing your mission?" Jiang Pingji felt a headache when she heard that. She said, "What exactly are you referring to, old chief? My mentality is very normal." She really didn't know what was wrong with her, but bystanders could see things clearly. Perhaps the old chief really saw something, so she listened attentively. "You Abba, you've long suspected that there was something wrong, but why did you still fall into the enemy's ambush?" Jiang Pingji sneered. Didn't the old chief say that if you pretend to be a pig to eat a tiger for too long, you'll be assimilated? Remember not to make the same mistake next time. After she said that, the old chief was silent for a long time. After a while, he sent a long message to Jiang Pingji. Your Abba, that's part of the reason, but isn't the other reason that you're in a hurry? Jiang Pingji frowned slightly. What did she mean by anxious for quick results? She looked very anxious. Old chief, you're wrong to say that. When have I ever been impatient for success? If I was really in a hurry, I would have pestered you to mail me mecha, battleships, or other firearms. It's not easy to dominate the world. Let's take a step back and say that I can use my own abilities if things don't work out, but I don't have any. How can you say that I'm anxious for quick results? Jiang Pingji felt wronged. The old chief's accusation was groundless. Your Abba, you said no? Aren't you in a hurry to attack the city and settle the matter in front of you so that you can return to the Federation? For the sake of this goal, your mentality has changed. You are far less serious than before. To put it bluntly, you have even lost the basic respect for life. You knew that something was wrong. You knew that the spiritual realm could help you investigate the enemy's situation and avoid harm, but you never thought about this. Rather than saying that you were assimilated and forgot about this ability, it's more accurate to say that you subconsciously did not intend to use it. The more Jiang Pingji listened, the more she frowned. To outsiders, she looked like she was wiping the blood off the god-slaying sword. Old chief, if you have something to say, just say it. Why do you have to beat around the bush? Your Abba, are the lives of the soldiers under your command important to you? She was a genetic warrior. The education she received from a young age was to sacrifice everything for the overall situation, including her own life. Jiang Pingji could even sacrifice her own life. What else could she not give up? In order to achieve her goal, it was normal to sacrifice the lives of the soldiers under her command. However, Jiang Pingji said, of course it's important. Your Abba, did you really not know that the enemy had set up an ambush? Or, did you take the bait even though you knew there was an ambush? Jiang Pingji's lips curled into a cold smile. What's the difference? Your Abba, whether it's an ambush or not, you have to take the bait. Therefore, of course, you don't need to use your spiritual realm to investigate the enemy. You don't need to. Isn't it to prevent yourself from knowing the truth and alerting the enemy? You used yourself and the soldiers under your command as bait to lure the enemy. Aren't you afraid that you'll capsize if you're careless? In your plan, how many people do you plan to sacrifice to achieve this? Jiang Pingji blinked and smiled. I don't understand what you mean, old chief. Your Abba, you want to wipe out the Nye family's troops, don't you? Jiang Pingji said, I've stayed here long enough. Isn't it better to get rid of the Nye family and end the war as soon as possible? Your Abba, you finally admit it. Jiang Pingji did not comment. Not only was Wei Yong plotting against her, but she was also playing along. If Wei Yong's retreat was true, it would be best. The troops sent out could ambush the Nye camp. It would be considered a victory. If Wei Yong's retreat was a trap, what could it be? Jiang Pingji put herself in Wei Yong's shoes and roughly guessed the enemy's plan. It was no exception. They would set up an ambush to kill the troops that ambushed the Nye camp. What's more, they would arrange for an ambush to ambush Zhanjiang Pass. If they ambushed Zhanjiang Pass, Wei Yong would definitely go all out and send out all his troops. Jiang Pingji weighed the two options. Her brows had never relaxed. In the end, she decided to beat them at their own game. Regardless of whether the enemy was acting or not, she would find out after a while. She did not use her spiritual realm to investigate. Just as the old chief said, she did not think of it. Secondly, she did not plan to use it. Whether it was the enemy's scheme or not, it was all within her calculations. Except for a few people, Qin Gong and Bai Ning did not know about this plan. A secret was a secret because few people knew about it. The fewer people who knew about it, the smaller the loopholes. She could protect the lives of the two of them, but she could not guarantee the survival of the other soldiers. The old chief was angry and reprimanded her, mostly because of this. In order to achieve her goal, Jiang Pingji pushed the soldiers who did not know about it to their deaths. Old chief, I've never been a good person. The rule of genetic warriors is to achieve their goals by hook or by crook. Necessary sacrifices are inevitable. Jiang Pengji said calmly, on the whole, the Nie family has been destroyed. Our army's overall losses are smaller. If the Nie family was allowed to jump around, the two armies would fight one battle after another. The accumulated losses would be too great. It was better to gather the troops and set up a dead end for them. They would suffer a heavy setback and suffer a great loss. Even though, this plan would sacrifice some innocent soldiers. Your Abba, if it were the federal soldiers, would you sacrifice them without hesitation? Chapter 1542. My lord, the enemy has fled. Should we chase after them or rescue Zhanjiang Pass? Qin Gong wiped the blood off his face and revealed a carefree expression. The battle tonight was really satisfying. Jiang Pengji looked at Zhanjiang Pass from afar. Her eyes were as deep and dark as a deep pool, containing a coldness that outsiders could not perceive. Capture the remaining soldiers. The battle at Zhanjiang Pass is probably over. Qin Gong was stunned. He did not seem to understand what Jiang Pengji meant. What did she mean by, the battle at Zhanjiang Pass is probably over? Would our army or the enemy be victorious? He had looked in the direction of Zhanjiang Pass earlier. The flames there soared into the sky and dyed the pitch-black sky red. It was obvious how intense the battle was. If the enemy came out in full force, Zhanjiang Pass would most likely be routed thousands of miles away when it was undefended. However, his lord looked as if she had a well-thought-out plan. Could it be that there was something else going on? Jiang Pengji interrupted his speculation. Why are you in a daze? Qin Gong said, I'm just curious. If the enemy comes out in full force, it seems impossible to defend Zhanjiang Pass. Jiang Pengji said, why not? Do you know what it means to wait for a hare by a stump and catch a turtle in a jar? Qin Gong said, although I'm not as knowledgeable as you, I understand the meaning of the words. My lord, do you mean that the Nie army failed to sneak attack Zhanjiang Pass and instead fell into our army's counterattack? That's not right. Our troops are all guarding the pass. How can we have extra troops to carry out an ambush? You're half right, Jiang Pengji said. Besides, who told you that the remaining troops of our army are guarding the pass? If one was attentive, he or she would probably discover a very strange thing. The troops that Jiang Pengji brought to guard the pass were about tens of thousands of troops of the Nie army. Tonight, the troops that attacked Jiang Pengji were twice as many as hers. The troops guarding Zhanjiang Pass were also much fewer than the Nie army. So the question was, where did the troops that had disappeared under Jiang Pengji's command go? Qin Gong did not turn around for a while. Jiang Pengji's indifferent face revealed a slight smile. At that moment, she saw the old chief send her a message from the corner of her eye. Your Abba, I can't comment on whether your behavior is right or wrong. I just hope that you can stay true to yourself. Also, there's something I forgot to tell you. It's because your genes awakened much earlier than I expected. There was a flaw in the ancestral atavism gene of the Jiang clan's ancestor. To be more specific, it would affect one's temperament, causing one to be easily angered and unable to control the killing intent and dark emotions in one's heart. Jiang Pengji said, does the old chief think that my decision to sacrifice the troops and horses was influenced by the awakening? Your Abba, no, I'm reminding you not to let the sky brain take advantage of me. I don't want to kill my successor with my own hands. Jiang Pengji frowned slightly. The old chief's words had a deeper meaning. I'm not a 3-year-old kid. How could I be bewitched by him? Your Abba, nothing is absolute. The Jiangs were so prosperous hundreds of years ago. They had so many talents in the family, but they were still killed. No matter how capable Jiang Pengji was, could she be stronger than those geniuses? Even other people had fallen into the trap of the sky's brain, let alone Jiang Pengji, who was just a little girl in her early 50s. Jiang Pengji rubbed the space between her eyebrows and promised, I'll be careful. Your Abba, you don't have to worry too much about the sequelae of the awakening of the ancient bloodline. Your mind is very stable. You won't be as unlucky as your ancestors. Your current task is to manage your lousy farm well. You've been here for 10 years. Do you still have 3 to 5 years left? Jiang Pengji smiled bitterly to herself. The old chief said it lightly, but she wasn't herself. Jiang Pengji had been in this backward and ignorant era for too long. She originally thought that she would not be able to return to the Federation, so she gave up and managed everything she had. Unexpectedly, the old chief appeared and told her that it was probably a trap set against the sky's brain. At the same time, he tested her to see if she had the qualifications to become a marshal. Jiang Pengji could return to her own era. Why would she waste time and energy in an unfamiliar place? As time went by, such thoughts became clearer and clearer. It affected her mentality more or less. However, no matter what, she did not regret the plan this time. If there was anything she regretted, it was probably that she regretted hiding it from Qin Gong, Bai Ning, and the troops. They unknowingly stepped into the enemy's trap and caused additional casualties. She did not regret anything else. It was fine as long as she had a clear conscience. If she was given another chance, she would do the same thing again. She did not regret sacrificing a small number of people for the sake of overall victory. Jiang Pengji suddenly missed the fruit candy that she loved to eat when she was young. She wanted to return to the Federation, even if it was a place full of danger. 3 to 5 years? Does the old chief mean that when the world is unified, you plan to come and help me share this mess? You Abba, I didn't say anything. Jiang Pengji smiled and teased, Old chief, call me Anyang in advance. You Abba, get lost. Jiang Pengji scratched her head. A huge stone was lifted from her heart. She was really worried that she would waste the rest of her life in this world. If the old chief came to take over, she would not even need to give birth to an heir. Saves trouble. Jiang Pengji sighed with emotion. Qin Gong asked in surprise, What do you mean saves trouble, my lord? Jiang Pengji said, What do you mean by saves trouble in the future? I don't even need to teach her. If she can crawl, I can be exploited as a child laborer. Qin Gong suddenly widened his eyes. He could not help but glance at Jiang Pengji's lower abdomen. My lord, has a young master? Then why did she kill so fiercely before? My lord, should I call for a military doctor to take a look at you? Young master, the baby that the military counselors have been looking forward to for almost 10 years is finally coming? Jiang Pengji rolled her eyes at him and said angrily, What are you looking at? I'm fine. I'll clear the thoughts out of your head. Did he really think that she could not see what was going on in his head? At the same time, the situation at Zhanjiang Pass was progressing as Jiang Pengji had expected. Qiguan Rang seized the opportunity to send troops to attack and disrupt the Nye army's formation. The two armies were in a chaotic battle. War cries could be heard everywhere. From time to time, the screams of soldiers who were hit by the fireballs from the catapults could be heard. Qiguan Rang's cold eyes stared at the back of the Nye army, as if he was waiting for something. Reporting, military counselor, the orderly was covered in blood. A large piece of skin on his forehead had been sliced off by the enemy's sharp weapon. He looked extremely terrifying, but he seemed to be unaware of it. He reported the changes on the battlefield clearly. The enemy's attack is swift and violent. I'm afraid our army will be defeated. Fear was like a snowball rolling bigger and bigger. The defending troops at Zhanjiang Pass had been defeated by the enemy on the battlefield. They might not be able to make a comeback. Qiguan Rang looked up at the horizon and said, It's time. Someone, send the signal. The guard who had been following Qiguan Rang stepped out and said, Yes, sir. As he finished speaking, he took out a thick and strange bamboo tube from his waist and carefully lit it to light the fire. Squeak! A sharp whistling sound was heard. The bamboo tube shot out a beam of red light. It rose to the highest point and suddenly exploded. Qiguan Rang looked at the Nye family who were fighting fiercely under Erdeo City and suddenly smiled coldly. Chapter 1543. The sounds of killing covered the sharp whistling of the fireworks. However, when it bloomed, it still attracted the gazes of many people. Wei Yong was one of them. Looking at the dazzling red fireworks, an ominous feeling filled his heart. Guangshan, we will win, right? Wei Yong looked at the fireworks disappearing into the horizon and muttered. Apart from himself, no one else heard him. Despite having an ominous feeling, Wei Yong did not give the order to retreat or do anything else. What a joke! At this moment, the two armies were in a stalemate, and it was impossible for them to back down. Whoever showed signs of weakness would lose. Wei Yong suppressed the worry in his heart. He stared at the changes in the battle while ordering the soldiers to be on high alert to prevent any possible sneak attacks. Unfortunately, Wei Yong did not know that there was a psychological thing called the Murphy effect. The more one did not want something to happen, the more likely it would happen. In less than a quarter of an hour, a blood-soaked messenger suddenly rushed over and shouted at the top of his lungs, reporting, Wei Yong's heart beat even faster. He asked, "What's the matter?" The soldier said, "Tens of thousands of enemy troops suddenly appeared behind us." Behind us? Wei Yong's heart beat even faster. He turned his head to look in the direction of Zhanjiang Pass that they had broken through not long ago. A large number of enemy troops had indeed appeared there and were sneak attacking the weakly defended rear. The enemy's attacks were swift and fierce in front, and there were jackals staring at them from behind. The Nie army was actually surrounded. There were only a few exits in Zhanjiang Pass. In other words, the Nie army had no way to retreat. The enemy's appearance was quite clever. Not only did they attack from the front and back, they also used violence to break up the Nie army's formation, causing the army to fall into chaos. Seeing this, Wei Yong could not help but clench his fists until his knuckles turned white. He clenched his teeth and trembled because of his intense emotions. The Nie army focused on attacking the enemy in front of him. As the two armies were in a stalemate, he did not suspect that the enemy had the strength to split up and ambush them. Who would have thought that the enemy would be so ruthless and patient, not revealing this trump card even when Zhanjiang Pass was about to be breached? Instead, they had to lure the Nie army into Zhanjiang Pass and only used this trump card after the two armies fought? Wei Yong was thoroughly convinced by his forbearance. Even though they were pincered by the enemy and the Nie army was in disarray, Wei Yong did not give up. He tried to lead the troops to break out of the encirclement, but Qiguan Rang and the others were determined to keep the Nie army here, not giving them a way out. This slaughter continued from dawn till dusk. Only then did it stop. After a fierce battle, nearly 200,000 Nie soldiers were defeated. In the end, only 20 to 30,000 of them managed to escape. The remaining soldiers were unlucky. When they retreated, they bumped into Jiang Pingji, who was leading the troops back. Once again, they were ruthlessly attacked. When Jiang Pingji returned with her troops, the 5 million idlers in the streaming room were still laughing, but they soon stopped laughing. Zhanjiang Pass was covered in blood. The originally majestic city walls were now full of holes. Every inch of the walls was soaked in the blood of both sides. Jiang Pingji acted as if she didn't see any of this. She rode her horse through the city entrance and entered Zhanjiang Pass. Drip, drip. The salted fishes were shocked to find that there was scarlet blood in the potholes on the ground. Big White's hooves would always splash blood when they stepped into the shallow potholes. Tudufeiqiu, streamer, was it raining last night? Kazijio Chifen, it doesn't look like it was raining, the salted fishes spoke cautiously. Some of the more sensitive ones found that there was something wrong with the streamer that day. This kind of abnormality made them explode with a desire to live from heaven. All of them kept quiet out of fear. For example, it was probably low air pressure. Just looking at her made one feel a sense of heaviness. It made one's heart feel stuffy, and even breathing felt laborious. Gui Kai Guo Fengxiu, how is it raining? It's obviously blood. What happened at Zhanjiang Pass last night? Why is there so much blood? Did the Nie army sneak attack again? Streamer, you're not being honest. You should have started streaming last night. It's a pity that you missed it. The salted fishes complained. This was not the first time that Jiang Pingji had secretly eaten alone. In the past, many important battles happened in the middle of the night, but she was unwilling to start streaming. This caused many of the salted fishes to wake up the next day to find that they had slept and the world had turned upside down. Jiang Pingji held the god-slaying sword tightly and closed her eyes slightly. She ignored the salted fish's comments. Further ahead, the salted fishes saw many soldiers moving corpses and cleaning up the battlefield. The broken limbs and wreckage stimulated their eyes. Everywhere they looked was a scene of devastation. Corpses covered the place as far as their eyes could see. They died in different ways. Some of the corpses were still on fire. Even if the salted fishes were used to seeing storms and waves, they could not bear it at that moment. Some even turned their heads and vomited. Bai Ning rode behind her. His dry eyes were bloodshot. He glanced at the corpses and suddenly felt a little emotional. This battle, I don't know if it's a great victory or a Pyrrhic victory. It was obvious that the enemy had sacrificed more soldiers and horses. It could almost be considered a total annihilation, but they had lost 40,000 to 50,000 soldiers. Jiang Pingji looked indifferent and said, whether it's a great victory or a Pyrrhic victory, it's still a victory. Bai Ning smiled bitterly and said, my lord is right. I'm just feeling emotional. In this chaotic world, how many times will this scene repeat? His injuries were more serious. After emergency treatment by the military doctor, he was not in much danger, but he still needed to recuperate for a month or two. Although he could still ride the horse steadily, in fact, he was forcing himself to hold on. He was not made of iron. He had been fighting for more than 24 hours without sleep and rest. He was also injured and lost blood. An ordinary person would not have been able to hold on. His lord could not be considered a person at all. How is Fengjing? Jiang Pingji asked. Bai Ning smiled and said, young people nowadays are not as good at enduring hardships as my generation. Fengjing was injured so badly that he was lying on the ground. The military doctor reported that the situation was not serious, but the injury was very serious. He needs to rest for 2 months. The wound needs to be taken care of. Otherwise, it will fester. Jiang Pingji said, squatting in the camp for 2 months is better than losing his life on the battlefield. Bai Ning listened to her and felt a little uncomfortable. He and Qin Gong were not fools. Some things they did not realize at the time, but after the war stopped and they thought about it, they could figure it out. They could not guess the details of the whole layout, but they knew the general direction. If they guessed correctly, the Lord and their 30,000 soldiers were the bait thrown out. Understanding this, Bai Ning did not know what to say. At the same time, he was not in a position to say anything. As the Lord, she had gambled her life. What was Bai Ning and the others? Not to mention that they had survived. Even if they lost their lives, it was a profitable trade to exchange 50,000 soldiers for 200,000 soldiers of the enemy. Bai Ning sighed secretly. Suddenly, he spat and scolded in his heart, this messy world. Chapter 1544. Seeing his lord return, Qiguan Rang still felt uneasy. Seeing Jiang Pingji alive and well, he heaved a sigh of relief. Qiguan Rang initially suggested Qin Gong and Bai Ning to lead the troops and inform them of the plan in private. However, his lord refused and insisted on leading the troops herself. When he asked for the reason, she remained silent. Qiguan Rang felt that it was both a blessing and a pain to have such a lord. It was a blessing to have such a tacit understanding with his lord, but he was always on the verge of death. It was painful to spread his wings. How's the battle situation? Jiang Pingji got off the horse's back and raised her hand to stroke White's mane. It rubbed against her hand intimately, panting heavily. White was a top-notch warhorse, but it wasn't made of iron. It had fought for so long with Jiang Pingji on its back and exhausted its strength. Qiguan Rang roughly explained the situation. The overall data was not too different from the battle report Jiang Pingji had received. Apart from a small group of defeated soldiers who fled, the rest were either dead or captured. The casualties were extremely heavy. Qiguan Rang said, after this battle, the Nie family will never have a chance to rise again. The opportunity for our army to conquer Zhongzhou is right in front of us. Including the troops and horses lost while Nie Liang was still alive, the Nie family had lost 260,000 troops when they attacked Zhanjiang Pass. These troops were the Nie family's assets. Losing them all at once, the Nie family didn't even have their underpants left. There were many feudal lords in Zhongzhou, but only Nie Liang had the ability to fight against Jiang Pingji, who knew that Nie Liang would die early, followed by repeated defeats. In the last battle, they lost their underpants. In other words, it was only a matter of time before they conquered Zhongzhou. At the thought of his lord extending her hand to the big cake that was Zhongzhou, Qiguan Rang trembled with excitement. Zhongzhou? Jiang Pingji raised her hand to rub her forehead, but her palm touched the dried blood clot. She froze for a moment and put her hand down without a trace. She said tiredly, "Let's put the matter of Zhongzhou aside for a while. Let the soldiers rest and conserve their energy." Qiguan Rang looked at her carefully and noticed that her eyes were bloodshot. Her eyes were also a little red. It seemed that she was really tired. If that's the case, then we'll follow the Lord's wishes and take a break for now. Let Zhongzhou fight among itself for a while. The corners of Jiang Pingji's lips curled up reluctantly. "Oh yes, there's a captive? Does my lord want to see him?" Qiguan Rang asked. "Isn't my lord curious about why Zixiao isn't here?" Jiang Pingji said, "That captive is related to Zixiao? Could it be his eldest brother, Wei Qiu?" Qiguan Rang smiled and said, "My lord is still as powerful as ever. You guessed correctly in one go. It is indeed Wei Qiu." Jiang Pingji tightened her grip on the reins and suddenly thought of something. She said coldly, "We'll see tomorrow. I'm really tired today." Qiguan Rang seemed to understand something. He sighed and said, "Yes." The two of them didn't say it clearly, but they understood each other's meaning. It was impossible for Jiang Pingji to recruit Wei Dan. It was not that she was not charming enough, but Wei Dan was bound to Nie Liang. He could only be destroyed and not transferred. She said that she did not want to see Wei Dan, but she wanted to set aside a night for Wei Ci and Wei Dan to have a good time together. What would happen tomorrow, whether Wei Yao lived or died, depended on what Wei Yao thought. Jiang Pingji hurriedly said a few words and turned off the live stream. She went to a nearby well to fetch a bucket of water. She looked indifferent when she found that the water in the well was also red. She suddenly lost the thought of washing up. Qiguan Rang was attentive. He sent a soldier to fetch a bucket of water from a place a mile or two away for her. Jiang Pingji did not ask someone to boil the water. She directly washed the bloodstains on her body with cold water. Her swollen mind became much clearer. "You Abba, your eyes," Jiang Pingji said coldly. "What?" "You Abba, I originally thought that the sequelae of the awakening would not affect you much. It seems that I guessed wrong." Jiang Pingji used the water as a mirror to look at her eyes. She found that her eyes, which were originally light brown and slightly black, had a tinge of red. "It's okay. I'll just say that I'm jealous." Jiang Pingji was very open-minded. "You Abba, remember to control your emotions. The ancestral genes of the Jiang family are very violent. You have to keep a clear mind." "I know. I don't need you to remind me again." Jiang Pingji used a dry towel to wipe her wet hair and suddenly asked a question. "I remember the old chief said that he would leave the Federation a long time ago. Why are you so clear about the Federation's plans?" "You Abba, I've been the chief of the army for more than 100 years. I've seen more classified files than you." Jiang Pingji laughed. "Is the old chief in love?" "You Abba, what? That's a big jump." Jiang Pingji said, "The 7th Army is the first vanguard. When necessary, they will sacrifice a small part of their interests. That's what you taught me. But you said those words to me yesterday. I'm a little surprised. Is the old chief in love and becoming a little woman? His heart has softened?" "You Abba, tisk, Jiang Xiaojiu has grown bolder. He even dares to tease me." "You Abba, when in a position, one has to take care of politics. When not in a position, one doesn't take care of politics. It's normal for one's mentality to change. I'm being too harsh." Jiang Pingji was silent after reading it. That night, she copied the heart-cleansing incantation. Wei Ci had taught her that. When she was upset, copying it would help calm her mind. At the same time, the atmosphere at the Wei brothers' side was very tense. Wei Ci could be said to have been brought up by Wei Dan. When he was young, Wei Dan was also the one who taught him step by step. In Wei Si's heart, Wei Dan was like a brother and a father. He was more like a father than a father. In their previous lives, the two brothers did not have the opportunity to confront each other at the front lines. Now that it had been realized, the situation was like this in the end. But eldest brother refused to retreat at the front lines? Wei Dan was considered a core member of the Nie family. If they wanted to retreat, he would definitely be the target of everyone's protection. But in the end he was captured. Rather than saying that he was unlucky, it was better to say that Wei Dan had no intention of escaping back. If you were me, would you have the face to go back? Wei Dan asked him. Wei Si was speechless. Wei Dan said, Zixiao has been smart and quick-witted since he was young. I don't think you're here to persuade him to surrender. He used a declarative sentence and his tone was firm. Wei Si said, you and I haven't met for many years. We only met briefly in front of Guangshan's tomb. Why don't we take this opportunity to have a good reunion? He understood his eldest brother's temperament. It would be useless to persuade him. The other party's position and choice could not be changed with just a few words. Wei Dan said, sure. Most of the candles on the table were burnt. Wei Dan suddenly asked Wei Si, do you still hate father? Wei Si's childhood was extremely unfortunate because of his horoscope and the death of his birth mother. This was also partly due to his father's neglect. Wei Si avoided the topic and said vaguely, those things are already in the past. Wei Dan said, although there are many sons in the family, there are few who can stand. In the future, I'll have to trouble you to take care of everything in the family. Wei Si's hand paused and he said softly, I won't let outsiders bully them. I'll take good care of them. Of course, that was all. Chapter 1545. After all, they were blood brothers. Even though they had been separated for many years, Wei Yong still understood his younger brother very well. He could read between the lines. If that's the case, then I can rest assured. Wei Yong looked very haggard. His usually neatly groomed hair was now gray, and his face was full of exhaustion. Wei Si could not help but say, even so, what I can do is limited. If I overstep my boundaries, I'm afraid it's beyond my power. Wei Yong understood what his brother was referring to and laughed in spite of himself. All these years, you haven't received much kindness from the clan. It's truly not easy for you to still care about your family and be willing to help them. I'm not a thick-skinned person, so why would I ask you to do anything? What happened back then had indeed hurt Wei Si too much. Because of his 8 characters, everyone pinned the crime of causing his birth mother's death on the newly born Wei Si. Because of this, his father also developed a dislike for him. Wei Si only slowly let go of this disgust when he was 11 or 12 years old, but it was too late by then. Due to his father's indifference and his relatives' cold treatment, Wei Si's childhood could not be said to be easy. How much did everyone ignore him? When Wei Yong returned from his study trip, he found that his younger brother, who should have been enlightened for 2 years, could not even read a word. It was clear that no one remembered his enlightenment. He specifically went to look for his father and told him about this. Only then did his father realize in hindsight that he had hired a mediocre teacher for Wei Si. Wei Dan couldn't bear to see his talented younger brother being trampled upon, so he had no choice but to do it himself. During the day, he learned the basics from the teacher, and at night, he would come back and give special attention. However, Wei Dan was also a young man with limited energy and talent. In the end, he sent his younger brother to the private school opened by Master Yuan Jing. Looking back at Wei Si's childhood, delaying his enlightenment by 2 years was considered a small matter. The most serious time was when his life was threatened. Because the servants did not serve him well, Wei Si caught a cold. He had a high fever for 2 days before it was discovered. Everyone thought that it was a normal fever, and the doctor they invited was only mediocre. When Wei Dan returned to the mansion, he found that his younger brother was about to go crazy from the fever. He hurriedly sent him to Xing Lin Divine Hands to save his life. Knowing these matters of the past, Wei Yong had no way of asking his younger brother to do anything for the clan. Moreover, Wei Si was a man of his word. Since he had promised to take care of his family, he would definitely do it. Elder brother, Wei Xia looked at Wei Dan and could not speak for a long time, as if something was stuck in his throat. Wei Dan understood his younger brother, but how could Wei Xia not understand his elder brother? Whether it was his previous life or this life, Wei Xi's temperament had not changed much. In his previous life, he had died of depression because of the early death of his best friend. In this life, he was afraid. Thinking of this, Wei Xia felt as if thousands of words were stuck in his throat. He felt powerless and could not even say the last sentence. Wei Yong was very open-minded. He said, "Are you trying to persuade me to drag out an ignoble existence?" He didn't even address himself as brother anymore. Under the candlelight, there was a hint of melancholy between his brows. Wei Xi's hands, which were on his knees, clenched the hem of his clothes tightly. He said with difficulty, "Why don't you think about sister-in-law, nephews and nieces?" Although he didn't like using kinship to kidnap his elder brother, if he could keep him alive, even if he had to stay alive, Wei Yong's gaze was gentle as she sighed inwardly. "You should understand my choice." Wei Yong's expression did not change, but there was a hint of reluctance in his eyes. "For your sister-in-law, write a letter on behalf of me to let her go. Let her find a good man to marry again. In my situation, even if I survive, it will only be torture for her and she will be wasting her life. Other than the youngest one, the rest of my children can set up their own families, so I don't have to worry too much." Wei Yong had 3 sons and 2 daughters. The youngest had already started to study. Wei Xi's lips moved, but he couldn't say a word. His elder brother had even planned all this. How could sister-in-law agree? The more he spoke, the softer his voice became. It sounded like he lacked confidence because Wei Xi recalled what happened in his previous life. In his previous life, Wei Yong and sister-in-law were a young couple. Like most couples in this world, they were arranged by their parents and arranged by the words of a matchmaker. They didn't know each other before marriage, and each performed their own duties after marriage. Rather than saying they were husband and wife, they were more like friends. A few years after Niel Yang's death, his elder brother's health deteriorated. After that, his elder brother passed away when he was less than 50. Sister-in-law was silent for 2 days before letting go. She seemed to have relieved some heavy responsibility in her speech. He caused a lot of harm. After that, the Wei family's power was weak and Wei Xi had a say in the imperial court, so he thought of helping his elder brother's family. His elder brother had 3 sons and 2 daughters. Other than the eldest son who was slightly mediocre, the other 2 sons were not bad. If they were to gain experience, they would have a promising future. Wei Xi was closer to his elder brother's family. During festivals, he would visit his sister-in-law and nephews who were widowed at home. While chatting, he heard that his sister-in-law had a good childhood sweetheart when she was still unmarried. However, that person passed away in the cold winter of the previous year. A few days after that, his sister-in-law also fell ill. What's there to hide? She's an old woman with 1 foot in the grave now. Why would she be afraid of people gossiping? Wei Xi only found out about this when he visited the residence. His sister-in-law did not hide it. Not long after Wei Yong's death, his sister-in-law became widowed at home. Her childhood sweetheart also lost his wife for many years. The 2 of them got in touch again by chance. The other party seemed to still have feelings for her, but his sister-in-law felt that she was old and it was very embarrassing to marry again at such an age. Moreover, her grandchildren all went to the academy one by one. She had to think about her grandchildren's reputation. After a few rejections, her childhood sweetheart passed away after waiting for a few years. When his sister-in-law heard the news, she couldn't take it anymore and became depressed. She also fell ill. Wei Zixuan has long lost the will to live. It's better to say it clearly. Once they part, they'll both be happy. Why delay it for so many years? You've really done a lot of harm. Wei Xi listened in silence and didn't criticize anything. This matter was indeed his elder brother's fault. His elder brother's situation in this life was worse than in his previous life. Even if he dragged out an ignoble existence, this time, with his temperament, He probably wouldn't live for long. He would die of depression. Wei Yong didn't know what his younger brother was thinking. He asked, "Are you married now?" Wei Ci exclaimed. He didn't know why his elder brother's topic had jumped to this. Not yet. Wei Yong asked him, "Is it because of yourself or something else? You should have a child to continue the family line." There was nothing that couldn't be said between brothers. Wei Ci didn't want to beat around the bush, so he honestly told him part of it. "It's not because of myself. I do have someone I like. It's just that due to the situation, I can't get married." Chapter 1546. You've had your own opinions since you were young, so I can't force you. But you should always pay attention to matters of the family. Wei Ci understood what his elder brother meant. In both his previous and current lives, his elder brother had recommended to him to adopt his nephew. Wei Dan was very good to Wei Ci. He had recommended many matchmaking sessions for him in his previous life. In the end, he had no choice but to let him adopt a son so that he would not have no one to rely on when he was old. "I mentioned it to you once many years ago, but you didn't agree. Now that you're 30 years old, you can't delay it for a married woman." His youngest son had no one to take care of him, and Wei Ci was unwilling to marry and have no children because he liked married women. It was better to adopt his nephew and have the best of both worlds. Wei Ci was speechless. His elder brother's imagination was still so wild. "I'll help you write the letter to release your wife. If you're willing to remarry, I'll take care of my nephew. If you're not willing to remarry, I'll send people to take care of them," Wei Ci said sincerely. "I'm afraid it's not appropriate to adopt a son." Wei Ci had clearly rejected it, so Wei Dan couldn't continue selling the recommendation. They tacitly forgot the previous topic and talked about the future situation. Jiang Pengji won, and the Nie family suffered a great defeat. If nothing went wrong, the world would be hers. Wei Dan had studied Jiang Pengji in private, so he could more or less speculate about her future ruling style and the way she would use people. As his elder brother, Wei Dan naturally wished his brother well. Wei Ci had chosen the right person, and he could not escape the honor of founding the country in the future. However, this didn't mean that Wei Ci's future career would be smooth sailing. There were many potential dangers. Wei Dan took advantage of the last night to teach his brother a lesson so that he wouldn't step on landmines. The most important part of the conversation was the struggle between the gentry and the commoners. Jiang Pingji obviously supported the poor, but she didn't intend to completely abandon the gentry. The two had different standpoints, and their interests were entangled. It would definitely be a hidden danger in the future. If Wei Ci wanted peace, it was best not to get involved. Speaking of this, Wei Dan suddenly thought of something. "Zixiao, it's best to have less contact with the Wei family in Bianzhou. It's even better if you cut off contact." Wei Ci was very surprised, as if he didn't expect this to come out of his elder brother's mouth. "But you're worried?" Wei Ling said, "I'm worried that you'll be sold and have to count the money for them." Wei Ci's hand paused and he almost dropped the teacup in his hand. He suppressed his panic and asked, "Why do you say so?" The Wei brothers belonged to the Langyao Wei family, which was a branch of the Wei family in Zhongzhao's Bianzhou. They had no choice but to move back to Zhongzhao because their family had fallen from grace. If he remembered correctly, his elder brother had a good relationship with the main branch in his previous life. Why did he warn him to be on guard in this life? Wei Yong said, "The Nie and Wei families dominate Bian province's aristocratic families. With large families and large businesses, there's no lack of conflict. Although the Wei family's internal strife isn't as unbridled as the Nie families, they're still unscrupulous. Who didn't have ambitions? The Wei family's ambition wasn't just to rule over Bian province. They couldn't allow a poor family to rise up and trample on their heads. It wasn't easy for you to get to where you are today. I'm worried that you'll be used." In the future, when Jiang Pengji really unified the 5 countries, the conflict between the gentry and the commoners would inevitably be brought to light. Wei Ci was considered a member of the aristocratic families and had the backing of the Wei family. If he didn't think of a way to protect himself, sooner or later he'd get into trouble. The best way was to sever ties with the Wei family and be a pure subject loyal only to the superior. He wouldn't participate in internal strife so that he wouldn't fall. The more Wei Ci listened, the more his hands trembled. In his previous life, he'd been closer to the Wei family. He'd worked hard to promote and train useful talents from the Wei family to be loyal to the imperial court. On one hand, they could be loyal to the imperial court and serve the emperor. On the other hand, they could save the declining Wei family. However, in the eyes of others, wouldn't this be forming a clique for personal gain? Some shrewd people in the imperial court knew Wei Ci's identity, such as Qiguan Rang and Feng Zhen. Wei Ci's action had indeed stepped on a landmine. It was no wonder that he'd been schemed against. Apart from that, Wei Ci lowered his eyelids. A conjecture that made him shiver all over appeared in his mind. Who was the villain who'd instigated Wei Tsong back then? Wei Ci thought it was the aristocracy led by the Nie family. Now that he thought about it, he seemed to have guessed wrong. It seemed that only the Wei family had the ability to extend their influence so far without attracting Wei Ci's attention and influence Wei Tsong little by little. If Wei Tsong ascended to the throne, wouldn't the Wei family stand to gain the most? Wei Tsong had been nurtured by Wei Ci as a scholar since he was young. He didn't have any political fighting skills. If he stepped on the crown prince, Jiang Yan, to ascend to the throne, could he be a good monarch? There were so many old officials in the imperial court who'd followed Her Majesty to conquer the world and had been on standby for a long time. How could he manipulate them? In order to sit firmly on the throne and balance the imperial court, Wei Tsong still had to rely on the Wei family in the end until he became a puppet emperor. If his ambition was greater, he could kill Wei Tsong and replace him, or even swap Wei Tsong's future heir. Without a sound, the world would have smoothly changed hands. However, these were only Wei Ci's conjectures. The truth could no longer be verified. I'll keep elder brother's advice in mind. Wei Ci's brows relaxed a little. He'd obviously taken Wei Dan's reminder to heart. Time passed quickly. In the blink of an eye, the sky was already turning white. The morning sun slowly rose from the horizon. Wei Dan exhaled. He hadn't closed his eyes to rest for a long time. His eyes were dry and bloodshot. Please. The soldiers said that Jiang Pingji summoned him. Wei Dan flicked the dust off his sleeves and said hoarsely, "Please lead the way." The person with the most complicated feelings was definitely Wei Ci. As intelligent as he was, he naturally knew his elder brother's choice. He couldn't bear to see his elder brother walk the path of death with his own eyes, but he couldn't hide at the side and not even send him on his last journey. After struggling for a while, he appeared in the commander's tent with a pale face. He looked absent-minded and absent-minded. When Wei Dan saw Jiang Pingji, he didn't kneel or bow. He didn't even bow. He stood 2 feet away from her and looked straight into her eyes. Jiang Pingji didn't argue with him and went straight to the point. "Have you thought it through?" Wei Dan said, "Yes." Jiang Pingji asked again, "You're unwilling to submit? Do you know my temperament? What will happen if you're unwilling to submit?" "Of course I know. Those who submit will prosper, and those who resist will perish." It's nothing more than these 6 words. Wei Dan smiled calmly. He wasn't someone who was afraid of death. Of course, he wasn't afraid of Jiang Pingji's threat. Jiang Pingji still wanted to try and give him a promise. "If you submit, I definitely won't make things difficult for you." So it wasn't because of Wei Dan himself, but because of Wei Dan's identity, who asked him to be Zixiao's elder brother? There's no need to say more. At this point, Jiang Pingji naturally wouldn't stop Wei Dan. Unexpectedly, Wei Dan said, "I have a wish. I wonder if Lord Lanting is willing to fulfill it?" Jiang Pingji was thinking of giving Wei Dan a quick death and leaving his corpse intact. She didn't expect Wei Dan to bring up another wish. "Speak." Wei Dan said, "Can I die in your hands?" As soon as he finished speaking, the expressions of several people present changed. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.